Welcome back to another story on Harryverse X. This time, we're bringing you, Thanos found Harry in cupboard at age 4 and Infinity Stones merged making him god of all reality. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the Cosmos. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive was exactly 37 inches wide and 52 inches long. Harry Potter knew this because he had measured it with his hands when he was 3, pressing his small palms flat against the walls the way a person checks the boundaries of a cage. He'd counted. He'd recounted. The numbers never changed. He was 4 years old now, and he had stopped measuring. The walls were the walls. They weren't going anywhere, and neither was he. Outside, the summer night was unremarkably perfect, the kind of evening that Petunia Dursley liked to describe to her neighbors as lovely, the sort where the roses smelled right and the hedges were trimmed and nothing was the least bit unusual. The Dursleys prided themselves on unusual being the one thing they never were. Vernon had said it once, loudly, over Sunday roast, as though it were a family motto, "We are normal people, and we will not have anything otherwise." Dudley had clapped at that, because Dudley clapped at most things Vernon said, and Petunia had smiled her thin smile and no one had looked at the cupboard door. Harry had heard it all through the slats. He was sitting with his knees pulled to his chest and his back against the wall that had the broken coat hook, the one that poked him if he leaned wrong. He'd learned not to lean wrong. He'd learned a lot of small things like that, which floorboard on the landing creaked, which tone of Vernon's voice meant stay invisible, how to eat slowly enough that the hunger didn't feel like a fist. He was 4 and he had a working education in the mechanics of making himself nothing. The single high vent near the floor let in a finger-width of moonlight. Harry watched the light bar move across the floor as the night progressed. He wasn't asleep. He rarely slept well. There were dreams sometimes, bright and enormous dreams full of colors he didn't have names for, and they woke him up feeling like something vast had tried to pour itself into him and hadn't quite fit. Tonight there were no dreams, because tonight he wasn't asleep. Tonight something was happening to the air. He felt it before he could describe it, a pressure, not unpleasant, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the sky holds its breath. The vent light didn't change. The house stayed quiet. Vernon's snoring came through the ceiling in its usual rhythm. But the air in the cupboard had gone very still, the way water goes still when something large moves beneath it. Harry pressed his back against the wall and watched the cupboard door. The latch didn't move. What happened instead was stranger. The darkness in the far corner of the cupboard, the corner where he kept his 2 books and the toy soldier with the missing arm, deepened. Not like something blocking the light. More like the darkness itself gained weight and intention. Harry stared at it. He was 4, and he had already learned that fear was less useful than attention, so he paid attention. The corner folded. There was no better word for it. Space rearranged itself with a sound like a single lone note played on an instrument that didn't exist, and then there was no corner anymore, just a door that hadn't been there before, and then the door was simply gone too, and what replaced it was a presence so enormous that the cupboard should have felt crushing and instead felt, absurdly, like it had gotten bigger. Thanos stepped through. He had to fold himself to do it, ducking a ceiling that came to his chest, shoulders turning sideways to clear a frame built for the coats of ordinary men. He was purple and massive and armored in something dark that wasn't quite metal, and his left hand wore a gauntlet that caught the moonlight and threw it back wrong, fractured, prismatic, 6 colors that had no business being in a cupboard on Privet Drive. His face was broad and heavy-browed and set in the expression of a being who had walked through the collapse of civilizations and found most of them predictable. He looked at Harry. Harry looked back. For 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. Thanos had crossed 6 galaxies following a resonance in the stones that had no explanation in any of his models, a disturbance that his instrument said was coming from Earth and his instinct said was coming from something older than Earth, and he had expected, what? A weapon someone had buried? An artifact? A nexus point of cosmic energy that he could catalog and contain? Not this. Not a 4-year-old child with knobbly knees and too large pajamas and a scar like a lightning bolt above his right eye, sitting in a cupboard that smelled of damp wood and old shoes, watching him with eyes that were very green and very, very calm. The gauntlet moved on its own. Thanos felt it before he registered what was happening, the pull, like gravity reversing specifically for the stones, all 6 of them straining toward the child simultaneously, the way compass needles swing toward north without asking permission. The space stone flared blue. The mind stone went yellow-white. The reality stone pulsed red and warm. Time stone, green and cycling. Power stone, violent purple contained only by the gauntlet's binding. Soul stone, and here Thanos's jaw tightened, because the soul stone had never done anything on its own in all the years he had hunted it, the soul stone glowed amber like dawn. "Stop," he said, to the gauntlet. It didn't stop. He had never said stop to the gauntlet before. He had never needed to. The stones followed his will, that was the entire architecture of his plan. They were forces to be wielded, not actors with preferences. The sudden reversal of that fundamental assumption hit him somewhere between his ribs and made him very, very still. Harry tilted his head. "You have pretty rocks," he said. Thanos looked at him. "Yes," he said, "because what else do you say to that? They're doing something. I'm aware. Is it supposed to do that?" Thanos straightened as much as the ceiling allowed. "No," he said honestly. "It is not." Harry considered this with the gravity of a 4-year-old confronted with new information. "Are you here to hurt me?" The question was delivered without wobble or drama, not a child who expected rescue, not a child performing bravery, just a child who had learned to ask the practical question first. Something in Thanos's chest, a region that hadn't been particularly active in some decades, registered that. "No," he said. "Aunt Petunia says not to let strangers in." "You did not let me in." Harry seemed to accept the logic of this. He looked at the gauntlet again, at the way the stones had begun to spin, individually, each in their own microorbit around the others, the way planets settle into their arrangements around a star. "What are they doing?" he asked. Thanos crouched. It brought him to roughly eye level with the boy, though he still filled the cupboard the way a mountain fills a valley. He studied Harry with the same methodical intensity he applied to everything, the scar, the thinness that was not the thinness of a child who ran and grew but the thinness of one who was not fed enough, the clarity in those green eyes that had no business being on a 4-year-old's face, and underneath it all, woven into the boy's very cellular structure as far as Thanos could perceive it, a resonance that matched the stones so precisely it made his instrument seem redundant. "They are choosing," Thanos said. "Choosing what?" "You." Harry looked at the gauntlet. Then he reached out his small hand, filthy, short-nailed, the hand of a child who did not own enough, and touched the nearest stone, the soul stone, with one finger. The universe held its breath. The stones left the gauntlet. Not violently. Not with the cataclysmic force that Thanos had always imagined would accompany losing the Infinity Stones, the shattering of his life's work that he had never allowed himself to picture. They simply moved, the way birds lift from a wire when they've decided to go somewhere, purposeful and inevitable. 6 stones, 6 colors, rising in a slow spiral from the gauntlet's housing and descending toward Harry Potter with a gravity of their own, and Thanos did not stop them. He tried to. His will reached for them with the force that had bent galactic civilizations to its shape, and they regarded his will the way an ocean regards a thrown stone. They noted it. They continued. Harry gasped. Not from pain. From magnitude. The stones touched him, not his skin, deeper than that, the way music doesn't touch your ears but something behind your ears, something that was always waiting for sound, and they went in. There was light, briefly, every color at once, a single second of total luminosity that should have blown the walls off the cupboard and the house off its foundations and the neighborhood off the map, and instead it happened in complete silence and left absolutely no mark on the physical world. The cupboard was dark. The house was quiet. Vernon's snoring continued. Harry sat in the same position, knees to his chest, back against the wall. But his eyes, which had been very green, were now something else, green still, but depth had been added to them, something behind the green that was the color of everything at once and the absence of color simultaneously, the way a prism looks in full light. He blinked once, slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water. "Oh," he said quietly. Thanos stared at the empty gauntlet. 6 housings, 6 cold settings, not a single stone. He looked at his hand for a long moment, and something moved through his expression that was not quite grief and not quite wonder and was, perhaps, both at once. He had spent centuries hunting these stones, had built his entire philosophy around their power, had sacrificed. He closed his hand into a fist. Then he opened it again. Slowly. "How do you feel?" he asked the boy. Harry considered the question with the same earnest seriousness he'd applied to every other question. "Big," he said. Then, after a pause, "but also the same." Thanos sat down. It was not a thing he did often, sitting, in the presence of another being, in a position that was not commanding. The floor of the cupboard creaked enormously under his weight. He sat cross-legged, absurd in a tiny space, and looked at the child who now contained what he had spent his entire existence trying to control. "What is your name?" he asked. "Harry. Harry Potter." "I am Thanos." "That's a weird name," Harry said. "Yes. It is." A pause. "Your name is also unusual. Aunt Petunia says my parents were weird. She says it like it's bad." Harry's brow furrowed. "I don't think it is." "No," Thanos said. "It is not." They looked at each other in the darkness of the cupboard under the stairs, and the universe, which had been holding its breath since the stones moved, let it out. Outside, something was happening to Vernon Dursley's prize rosebushes. They had begun, very quietly and without any wind, to bloom, every rosebud on every stem opening all at once in the middle of a night with no particular reason to bloom, fat and dark and fragrant in the July air. Petunia would find them in the morning and be inexplicably angry about it, though she wouldn't be able to say why. "You live here," Thanos said. It was not a question. He was building a picture. "In the cupboard," Harry confirmed. "This is the home of your family. Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon and Dudley." "They don't really," Harry stopped. "They don't like me very much." "Why not?" Harry shrugged his small shoulders with the practiced ease of someone who had shrugged at this question in his own head many times. "I make weird things happen. And they don't like weird. Uncle Vernon says." He looked at his hands. "I made Dudley's birthday cake fall off the table once. I don't know how. And last month I turned my hair blue and Aunt Petunia was very upset. They punish you for this. The cupboard is usually the punishment." He said it matter-of-factly, no performance in it. "Mostly I live here anyway." Thanos was quiet for a moment. His gaze moved to the cupboard door, through it in the meaningful way of someone who was seeing through walls as a casual function of attention. He could perceive Petunia Dursley asleep in a room full of nice things. Vernon, larger than average and building to larger, sleeping with the satisfaction of a man who thought all was right. The boy-shaped mass of Dudley, ringed by toys. He looked back at Harry. "Would you like to leave?" he asked. Harry went very still. In the silence, you could hear the distant sound of a car passing 2 streets over, and the creak of the house settling in the heat. His eyes, with their new impossible depth, were searching Thanos's face with an intensity that was startling in a 4-year-old. "Where would I go?" he asked carefully. "With me." "You're not from here." "No." "You're from," Harry hesitated. He was 4 and he didn't have the vocabulary, but something behind his eyes was reaching for it, the space stone's knowledge unspooling like thread in the dark. "Somewhere very far away. Somewhere with stars." "Yes." Harry thought about it. He thought about it the way that only a child who is very used to thinking alone can think, quietly, thoroughly, without rushing. He thought about the cupboard walls and their 37 inches of width. He thought about the dreams with the impossible colors. He thought about the sensation from a few minutes ago, that feeling of magnitude, like all the doors he'd been pressing against his whole short life had opened at once. "Will you bring me back if I want to come back?" he asked. "If you choose to, yes. Will you make me do things I don't want to?" Thanos looked at the child for a long moment. "I will train you," he said. "I will ask things of you. I will be demanding. But I will not," he paused in a way that suggested he was being precise, not hesitant, "cage you." Harry's eyes went to the walls of the cupboard. Then back to Thanos. The decision crossed his face the way weather crosses a plane, quick, total, and completely transforming. "Okay," he said. "Yes. Okay." He stood up and, with the automatic propriety of a child who had been taught to keep things tidy under threat of worse things, he picked up his 2 books and the toy soldier with the missing arm and held them to his chest. Thanos looked at the books. A battered picture book about a rabbit, its cover soft with handling, and a thin volume of fairy tales with a broken spine. He looked at the soldier. He looked at the boy standing in the middle of the cupboard holding everything he owned in both arms. Something shifted in the architecture of his face. "Is that all you are taking?" he asked. "It's all I have," Harry said simply. Thanos stood, filling the space, and held out the hand with the empty gauntlet. After a beat, he took the gauntlet off, the first time he had removed it voluntarily in years, and extended his bare hand instead, purple and huge. Harry looked at it, looked up at the face far above him, and then put his much smaller hand in it without hesitation. "We will return for anything else you need," Thanos said. "I don't think there is anything else," Harry said. They stepped out of the cupboard together, into the hallway of number 4, Privet Drive, at 2:17 in the morning. The house was quiet and dark and completely ordinary. The stairs went up in their usual direction. The photos of the Dursley family, dozens of them, Dudley's round face at every age, not a single image of Harry, marched up the wall. Harry looked at them as they passed. He didn't reach for them. He didn't look away either. He just looked, with his new deep eyes, and then he looked forward, and that was that. At the front door, Thanos paused. Harry felt him pause and looked up. "One moment," Thanos said. He turned back toward the house, not threatening, not raising his voice, and Harry felt something move through the air, quiet and surgical. It wasn't the stones, which Harry could feel as a warm constant hum in his own bones now, present and patient as a heartbeat. This was something else, something from Thanos himself, a focused act of will. In their beds, Vernon and Petunia Dursley shifted in their sleep. Something was being pressed into their dreaming minds, not pain, not terror, but a clear and unambiguous understanding, delivered with the precision of a sealed letter: "You will not look for him. You will not speak of him. He was never here." It was not cruelty. It was efficiency. The kind of mercy that doesn't waste time on whether it's wanted. Dudley would wake up in the morning and find, for reasons he could not explain, that the toy train he'd been given for his birthday, the good one, the big one, the one he told Harry he could never touch, was sitting outside the cupboard door, along with a packet of biscuits that nobody in the house had purchased and a note in no handwriting that any of them knew that said simply, "He deserved better. Be better than your parents." Dudley was 4 and couldn't read yet. But he kept the note for years. Outside, the summer night accepted them without fanfare. Privet Drive stretched in both directions, identical houses, identical hedges, the absolute confidence of a street that believed in its own normalcy with religious conviction. Thanos walked through it with Harry's hand in his, and the normalcy simply accommodated them the way water accommodates anything that moves through it, without acknowledgement, without record. At the end of the street, the space between 2 ordinary lampposts thinned. "Close your eyes," Thanos said. Harry closed them. He felt the warmth in his bones intensify for a moment, the stones recognizing what was about to happen and doing something that felt like leaning into it, and then the lamplight and the summer air and the smell of Privet Drive were gone, replaced by the cold that is not a temperature but an absence of everything that pretends to be one, and then by a warmth that came from a different direction entirely. He opened his eyes. They were standing on a balcony that overlooked a garden that occupied the top of a mountain that was one of several floating mountains in a sky the color of crushed amethyst. Across the valley between the mountains, something that might have been a city glowed in configurations that had no interest in being architectural by human standards. 3 moons hung at different heights, different phases, casually coexisting. The stars were thick and wrong and absolutely magnificent, not the thin scatter visible from Surrey but the full density of them, a sky so full of light that the darkness was the minority. Harry stood with his mouth open. He had never, there were no words for never that covered this adequately. He had never seen outside of Surrey. He had lived his entire 4 years in a circumference of 2 streets and a cupboard and the schoolyard he wasn't allowed to play in. He stood on an alien mountainside in a purple sky and his eyes went wide and wider and his hand tightened on Thanos's without thinking. Thanos watched him. The expression on his face was not one that appeared there often. "This is," Harry started. "Yes." "Is it real?" "Yes." "All of it?" "All the stars?" "All of them." "There are more beyond what you can see. More than there are numbers in your language to count them." Harry was quiet for a long moment, staring at the sky. Then he looked down at his hand, his small, ordinary human hand, and he could feel the stones in him like 6 voices that were not voices, present and vast and perfectly integrated, as though they'd always been there and the years before were the anomaly. "What am I now?" he asked. It was not a frightened question. It was the practical question again, the one he'd learned to ask first. Thanos considered it. He thought about what to say, the word host, the word vessel, various frameworks he'd developed for thinking about the stone's power. All of them fell short. The stones hadn't merged with Harry the way they merged with the gauntlet, as tools in a socket. They had become him, woven into his foundation, as fundamental now as his heartbeat or the color of his eyes. "I don't know exactly," he said, which was true, and which was also the most honest thing he had said in some years. "But I intend to find out." Harry nodded, accepting this with the equanimity of a child who had spent 4 years in a world that mostly didn't explain itself. He looked at the garden below, the alien flowers, the colors that had no names in English, the small things moving through the undergrowth that were not insects but served a similar function. He was holding his books and his soldier still, clutched to his chest. He looked at them, and then at the garden, and then he made a small unconscious gesture of decision and set the books carefully on the balcony railing. "Can I go down?" he asked. "Yes." He was down the steps and into the garden before Thanos had finished the word, barefoot in soil that was not the same composition as Earth's soil and moving with the immediate animal confidence of a child in a new place that doesn't feel dangerous, which it wasn't, not to him, not anymore. The small creatures in the undergrowth came to him without caution, which they had never done with anyone else in the garden's history. The alien flowers tracked toward him slightly, the way sunflowers track toward light. Thanos stood on the balcony and watched Harry Potter crouch in the alien garden under the triple moons, holding out his hand for a creature that looked like a cross between a moth and a small lamp to land on, his green eyes incandescent with a wonder that was entirely uncomplicated and entirely human. He had not brought the boy here to make him a weapon. He would examine that impulse later, when alone, and find it genuinely surprising. He had brought him here because the stones had chosen him, and because things that the universe itself selects as significant tend to become significant in ways that reward proximity, and because, he watched Harry laugh at the lamp moth, a small surprised sound of pure delight, because a child in a cupboard was a waste. The night deepened. The 3 moons crossed each other's paths. Harry fell asleep eventually, in the garden, curled under a flowering thing whose petals closed over him like a canopy when it sensed the warmth of his body, and Thanos lifted him without waking him and carried him inside, into rooms that had not been children's rooms before but would be shortly, and laid him down on something that approximated a bed well enough for one night. Harry, asleep, had both hands open. No tension in them. No bracing. The 4-year-old who had lived his whole life waiting for the next punishment slept with his hands open, on an alien world under 3 moons, having carried the books and the soldier that were all he owned to the edge of the universe and stepped off it without looking back. In the morning, Thanos began. He started with language. Not spells, not combat, not the application of stone power. Harry would come to those as he came to them, and they would teach themselves, he suspected. He started with language because you cannot think precisely about what you cannot name, and he intended for Harry to think precisely. There were 47 languages that mattered in the region of the universe they were in, and Harry was going to learn them. Not because Thanos told him to. Because Thanos showed him a map, an actual 3-dimensional holographic map of the region, spinning slowly above the garden table at breakfast, and said every point of light where people live has its own language, and you cannot understand a world you cannot speak. Harry looked at the map for a very long time. Then he looked up. How many people live there? In all of them? Thanos told him. Harry was quiet. Then, and they all have different languages. Many different languages. Some share roots. Many do not. Harry looked back at the map. Okay, he said. Show me. He was 4.5 by then and he learned his first alien language in 11 days, which was faster than most adults managed in 11 months, and he didn't do it because of the stones. He did it because he was constitutionally incapable of looking at a locked door, even a linguistic one, without wanting to know what was behind it. This, Thanos thought, watching him practice verb conjugations by talking to the lamp moths, was going to be interesting. The weeks became months and the training shifted with Harry's growing capacity, and the garden was replaced by wider grounds and then by a ship, and the ship went places, and Harry went with it, watching everything with those deep green eyes that the stones had altered, always asking the practical question first, always reaching his hand out toward the new thing before he'd fully assessed whether it was safe. On the 9th month, a being they encountered on a water world whose name translated roughly as Arbiter of the Deep took one look at Harry and prostrated itself on the surface of the ocean, creating a small wave. Thanos looked at it. That is not necessary, he said. The Arbiter surfaced one enormous eye. The stones, it said, in its own language, which Harry translated automatically under his breath. The stones are in him. Yes. All of them. All of them. The Arbiter made a sound that was either religious ecstasy or profound distress. What is he? Thanos looked at Harry, who was standing at the prow of their ship watching the water-world's twin suns set with the expression of someone storing a color for later. Harry felt his gaze and looked back, questioning. He says you're remarkable, Thanos called. Tell him thank you, Harry said, and turned back to the sunset. The Arbiter, who had not expected to hear its language from a human child, made the sound again, louder. What is he called? It asked. Thanos looked at the boy who had walked out of a cupboard holding 2 books and a broken soldier and hadn't hesitated once, the boy who was 4 years old and already reading the universe's shape the way other children read picture books, the boy whose bones sang with the voices of everything. Harry, he said. His name is Harry. Back on the ship that night, Harry came to find him, which he did often, wandering into wherever Thanos was working, sitting nearby, not always talking, comfortable with silence in the way of people who had spent a lot of time alone. He climbed up onto the observation bench and sat with his legs dangling and looked out at the stars going past, and after a while he said, "The stones talk to me." Thanos set down what he was doing. What do they say? Not words. More like, knowing things. Harry frowned, working out the language for an experience that was genuinely unprecedented. Like when you know the way home. You don't remember learning it, it's just there. He paused. Is that weird? In the context of your situation, Thanos said, nothing is weird. Harry accepted this. Then, the Soul Stone shows me things about people. Like when the Arbiter was being, whatever that was. I could tell it wasn't afraid. It was happy. Like it had been waiting and something had finally happened. Thanos was quiet for a moment. And what did you feel? When it reacted to you? Harry thought. Responsible, he said finally, with the peculiar precision of a child who picks words carefully. Like, if they're going to feel that way about something, it should at least be true. I should actually be worth that. Thanos looked at him for a long time. The stars ran past outside, thousands of them, each with their own histories of creation and catastrophe. That, he said, is the correct feeling. Harry nodded, satisfied with this, and went back to looking at the stars. His hands were in his lap, relaxed. The lamp from the console put light on the side of his face and made his scar look like a small white river. Outside, the universe continued its vast indifferent business, and inside the ship, the boy who was god of all reality sat with his legs dangling and watched it with the patient, honest attention it had always deserved and rarely received, and was, in the uncomplicated way of children who have been given space and warmth and honest conversation for the first time, simply happy. Number 4, Privet Drive was 27 star systems behind them. It would never be behind them far enough for it to not matter. That was the nature of the first wound, it travels. But it was, for the first time in Harry's short life, genuinely behind him. Ahead was everything else. And everything else was a very large thing to have in front of you. Harry, looking at the stars, smiled. Chapter 2, Godchild, Star taught the first time Harry moved a moon, he was 5 years old and doing it by accident. They were on Vormir, not the Vormir of shadow and sacrifice that the Soul Stone's history had carved into existence, but an earlier version, before the stone had left and taken the weight of its guardianship with it. The landscape was dramatic in the way of places that have been shaped by cosmic forces over geological time, red rock formations that rose like frozen arguments against the sky, valleys that went down farther than light could conveniently follow, and two moons that hung close enough to each other in the upper atmosphere that on clear nights you could see the gravitational flex between them, a subtle warping of the stars at their edges. Harry had been climbing the red rock formations unsupervised because Thanos had decided, around the 4-month mark, that supervised at all times was a philosophy that produced a certain kind of child and not the kind he was interested in producing. Harry climbed because he was 5 and 5-year-olds climb, and because the stones gave him an awareness of his own body in space that made falling a genuinely optional experience. He'd tested this twice already, deliberately, which had not surprised Thanos when he'd found out, because Harry's approach to his own limits was always empirical. He'd stepped off a moderate ledge and caught himself 3 feet down as naturally as breathing, and then spent an hour practicing the specific quality of attention that made it work. He was near the top of the largest formation now, sitting in a notch of rock with his knees up and his chin on his knees, watching the moons. The sun, Vormir's sun, was setting behind him, and the light it threw forward was red gold and horizontal, painting everything in the colors of something about to change. Harry watched the moons and felt, without particularly intending to, the space stone wake up behind his sternum. It happened the way yawning happens, unconscious, reflexive, a response to stimulus that bypassed the thinking part and went straight to the doing part. He felt the gravitational relationship between the two moons the way you feel pressure in a room, and without deciding to, he nudged it. Just slightly. Just to see what the feeling was. The larger moon moved 11,000 kilometers to the left. Harry blinked. The smaller moon, now subject to a gravitational relationship it hadn't signed up for, began a new and frankly alarming elliptical wobble. Down in the valley, the red rocks responded to the shifted tidal forces with a sound like slow thunder. Harry looked at his hands, then at the moons, then at his hands again. The stones hummed in him with what might have been amusement. He put the moon back. More carefully this time, he paid proper attention and felt the specific mechanism of it, the way the space stone interfaced with gravitational mass at distance, and he returned the larger moon to its original position within about 200 kilometers, which was close enough that the smaller moon stopped wobbling and resumed its normal orbit with only minor adjustments. He sat back in his rock notch and let out a breath. That, he told the empty sky, was a lot. Then he climbed down to find Thanos, because moving a moon by accident seemed like the kind of development you reported. Thanos was in the lower valley, doing something with instruments that measured things Harry didn't have names for yet. He looked up when Harry appeared, read the expression on his face, which was the expression of someone who had information that complicated things, and set down the instruments. "Tell me," he said. Harry told him. He was specific about it: which moon, approximate distance, the sensation of the space stone engaging, the correction. Thanos listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Harry had come to value about him. He listened the way you listen to a report, with full attention, without the running commentary of an adult who has decided they already know what a child is going to say. "Did it feel controlled?" Thanos asked when Harry finished. "No. That's the thing. It felt like sneezing." Thanos looked at him. "Sneezing? Like, I didn't choose to do it. My body just did it because something triggered it." Harry chewed his lip. "That's not good, right? That I'm moving moons by sneezing?" "It is not catastrophic yet," Thanos said, with the particular Thanos brand of reassurance that didn't bother being warm about it. "The moon is back. The moons of Vormir have survived worse." He picked up his instruments. "But it tells us that you need training in passive containment before we expand your active exercises. You understand the difference? Active is when I mean to. Passive is, keeping the stuff in even when I'm not thinking about it." "Yes. We start tomorrow. Can we start now?" Thanos looked at him. 5 years old, barefoot on alien rock, completely matter-of-fact about the fact that he'd just accidentally rearranged a moon. "We can start now," he said. They started now. The passive containment work was, in Harry's assessment, the most boring and most important thing Thanos ever taught him. It had no visible drama, no light shows, no physical effort, no satisfying crash or bloom of color. It was purely interior, the practice of maintaining a constant soft attention on the stone's impulses without either suppressing them or following them automatically, the way you maintain balance without consciously thinking about each muscle involved. Thanos had him sit in increasingly distracting environments, markets, battlefields at a safe remove, places of extreme beauty and extreme sorrow, and simply hold the level. It took 4 months. At the end of 4 months, Harry could walk through a collapsing building, a crowded festival, and a funeral in the same afternoon, and the stones wouldn't move anything without his explicit decision. He stopped reporting accidental manifestations because there weren't any. "How does it feel now?" Thanos asked. "Like I'm very full," Harry said, "but it doesn't spill." After passive containment came what Thanos called precision. The lesson was not use the stone's power. It was use the minimum necessary. This was where their first real argument happened. They were on a world called Keth, a mid-civilization planet in the Outer Territories where a regional conflict had been grinding on for 11 years and had recently escalated to the level where whole cities were being evacuated. Thanos had brought Harry there to observe. The Soul Stone's empathic capacity had been developing rapidly, and he wanted Harry to experience the emotional landscape of a genuine large-scale human crisis without acting on it, as an exercise in the distinction between feeling something and being obligated to fix it. Harry lasted 4 hours. Then he found a camp of displaced families at the edge of a razed city and looked at the children in it, specifically, for about 90 seconds, and then looked at Thanos. "I'm going to help them," he said. "You are here to observe. I know. But I'm going to help them." He said it without aggression, without defiance, just a statement of what was going to happen, delivered with the calm of someone who had already made the decision and was now simply informing. "They don't have enough food and 3 of the children are sick and the 2 older people in the orange tent haven't slept in 4 days. I can fix all of that in about 10 minutes. Thanos looked down at him. Harry looked back up. He was 5.5 and he came to somewhere below Thanos's elbow, and he was completely unmoved by the height differential. "If you fix it," Thanos said, "what happens to the next camp? And the one after that? You cannot fix every consequence of every conflict on every world." "No," Harry said. "But I can fix this one." "And what lesson do you take from that?" "That when something is within your power, you must always act." "No. The lesson is that power you don't use when you should is the same as not having it. Harry's eyes went briefly to the camp, to a small girl visible through the tent flap who reminded him, without him saying so, of no one in particular and everyone in general. I know I can't fix everything. But I'm standing here. There. He paused. Give me one reason that isn't about strategy or philosophy. Thanos did not give him a reason. Harry went to the camp. He was careful and quiet about it. The reality stone adjusted the food supplies without theater, the time stone nudged the sick children's cellular processes toward health rather than rewriting them entirely, the mind stone offered the exhausted elders a push toward sleep gentle enough that they'd think they'd simply sat down and closed their eyes. He was in and out in 12 minutes, and the camp looked exactly the same from the outside, just with better numbers in all the categories that mattered. He came back to Thanos and waited. Thanos was quiet for a long moment. Then, minimum necessary. I was minimal, Harry said. No one knows anything happened. Nothing was overdone. That is not what I mean. I mean, Thanos paused, and in the pause Harry saw him doing something he rarely did, reconsidering. Not the act, specifically. Something larger. You were correct, Thanos said finally. This time. And the rule? The rule stands. You must always ask the question. You must always make the choice consciously, not reflexively. But, he looked at the camp, and something moved through his expression that might have been old and complicated. The answer is not always no. Harry filed this away. You used to think it was always no, he said. Not accusatory. Observational. Thanos looked down at him. I thought about power differently before. What changed? A pause. You, Thanos said, very simply, and walked back toward the ship. Harry stood there for a moment, then followed, and didn't make it a bigger moment than it was, which was exactly the right thing to do. The argument about Thanos's philosophy came later, not in a dramatic confrontation, but incrementally, the way erosion works. It was built from 100 small conversations, each one adding to the cumulative weight, Harry approaching it with the patience of something that is in no hurry because it already knows where it's going. The core of it surfaced on a ship called the Sanctuary, where Thanos had connections and resources and a crew that Harry observed with the Soul Stone's quiet attention and found to be a collection of the misused and the damaged and the genuinely dangerous, bound together by fear and respect in roughly equal measure. Harry was 6 by then and had the social awareness of someone considerably older, having spent 2 years watching civilizations up close. He sat in the Sanctuary's observation deck with Thanos and asked about his plan. Not the plan, not the gauntlet and the snap, because Thanos hadn't articulated it in those terms yet, but the philosophy behind it. The resources will always be finite. Populations will always exceed them. The solution was to intervene before the catastrophe rather than after. Harry listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was his habit. When Thanos finished, Harry said, "The math is wrong." Thanos raised an eyebrow. "The math, resources aren't fixed," Harry said. "You're treating them like a closed system, but the universe is an open system. New stars, new chemistry, new worlds. If you put the same energy you'd put into, removing half of something, into expanding the available resources, you get a better outcome and nothing dies. On a timescale the timescale is the same. You have the space stone. I have it in me right now. We can open access to uninhabited systems in the time it takes to otherwise do what you're describing. The math only works if you assume everything is already allocated. It isn't." Harry looked at him steadily. "You know it isn't." Thanos was quiet. He had this look when Harry's arguments landed, not agreement, not yet, but the specific stillness of someone whose model has been complicated by a piece of data they hadn't included. "You're 6 years old," he said. "The stones have been around longer than that. This is not a debate you win by citing the stones. Then look at the math without them. Just the physics. Harry picked up the instrument Thanos used for cosmic mapping and pulled up a display. He walked Thanos through it, the distribution of uninhabited mass, the conversion ratios, the timelines. He'd been doing the calculations for 3 weeks because he'd seen this conversation coming. The numbers held. Thanos looked at the display for a long time. "You're asking me to change the foundation of my life's work," he said. "I'm asking you to look at whether the foundation is correct," Harry said. "Those are different." Another long silence. Outside, the stars moved. "I will consider it," Thanos said. "Okay," Harry said, and put the instrument down, and went to bed, because it was late and he was 6 and he still needed sleep, regardless of what he contained. He didn't push it again that night. Or the next week. He let the argument work on Thanos in the background the way arguments work when they're good ones, not because they're repeated but because they're true, and truth has a certain persistence. Over the next year, he watched Thanos quietly rerouting resource missions, watched him pull funding from certain projects and redirect it toward others, watched the philosophy shift by degrees without announcement or ceremony. He never said "I told you so." Partly because it wasn't necessary. Mostly because he genuinely respected Thanos and recognized that changing a deeply held belief was hard and deserved to be treated with care rather than triumph. The training itself expanded as Harry grew. By 6.5, he was in active combat drills with beings who were significantly larger and more experienced than he was, which Thanos arranged specifically because Harry needed to learn to fight from disadvantaged positions. The Power Stone gave him physical capability that was effectively unlimited, which meant that learning to fight without leading with it was the actual skill, because using overwhelming force as a first response was lazy, and Thanos had opinions about lazy. Harry's first combat teacher was a Kree warrior named Mintal who had spent 40 years as an elite soldier and who, upon being introduced to a 6-year-old human as her new student, said something in Kree that roughly translated to "This is deeply undignified." Harry had understood her perfectly, because he'd had Kree for 5 months by then. He'd looked up at her, she was tall and blue and deeply unimpressed, and said, in Kree, "I promise I'll be worth your time." She had looked at him with the assessing eye of someone who had seen a great many people promise great many things. Then she had launched a training strike at him with no warning, full speed, the kind of shot that would have put a human adult on the ground. Harry sidestepped it. Not with the stones, with his feet, reading the body language 2 seconds before the motion, because the Soul Stone had been teaching him to read bodies the way the Space Stone taught him to read distances. He stepped to the outside of the strike and put himself at her left shoulder, which was a tactically advantageous position, and he hadn't done anything supernatural to get there. Mintal froze. Turned slowly. Looked at him. "Where did you learn that red?" she asked, in Kree. "Watching," Harry said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, again. They trained every day for 8 months. Mintal was not warm, she was efficient and demanding, and she did not reduce the difficulty of the drills because he was small, which Harry found he respected enormously. She taught him to use his size rather than fight it, to generate force from angles rather than mass, to keep his attention distributed rather than focused, because focused attention had blind spots. She also taught him, this was the unexpected gift, that combat was a language, and that the kindest thing you could do in it was speak so clearly that your opponent understood immediately that they were done. Beating someone slowly, she told him, is cruelty. Winning quickly is respect. Harry absorbed this and filed it next to the minimum necessary principle and built something from both of them that would inform every conflict he'd be in for the rest of his life. By 7, he had 4 combat disciplines, 12 languages, a functional understanding of astrophysics and xenobiology, and an emotional intelligence that the Soul Stone had been methodically developing in a way that made him simply, often painfully, aware of what the people around him were carrying. He didn't always act on it. But he felt it. He was 7 years old and he felt the weight of people the way other children felt weather. The year he was 7 was also the year he met Nebula. She came to the sanctuary on what was clearly not a good day for her, metal rigid and incandescent with a rage that the Soul Stone read as grief wearing armor, because that was what it was. She was Thanos' daughter in the functional sense, which meant she'd been modified and trained in the particular brutal manner of Thanos' earlier period of parenting, before Harry had started the slow work of complicating him. She looked at Harry when they were introduced with the suspicion that was her default setting and said nothing. Harry said, "Do you want to sit? There's food. The blue stuff is actually good even though it looks wrong." Nebula stared at him. Then at the blue food. Then back at him. "How old are you?" 7. "Why are you here?" "Thanos found me." "And you, stayed?" "Willingly." "Yes." She looked at him for a long time, the soul stone showing Harry the layers under the look, the disbelief, the anger at the disbelief, the something underneath both of those that was sadder and older. "Why?" she asked. Harry thought about the cupboard. He thought about 37 inches of width, and the measuring he'd done with his hands, and the sound of Vernon's voice through the slats. "Better than the alternative," he said. Something shifted in Nebula's face. "Not much." "Enough." She sat down and tried the blue food and didn't say it was good, but she had seconds, and Harry didn't make a thing of it. They became, over time, something that wasn't quite friendship and wasn't quite siblings but was the specific bond of two people who had been dealt difficult opening hands and recognized it in each other. Nebula taught Harry things Mintal hadn't, the kind of fighting that came from desperation, from being outnumbered and outmatched and having no option but to find something else. Harry, for his part, did something for Nebula that was harder than any combat technique. He treated her consistently like someone whose opinion he valued, without making it a statement or a demonstration. Just, actually did. She showed up to his training sessions uninvited after a month and watched. After 2 months, she was correcting his footwork. After 3 months, Mintal had promoted her to co-instructor with the air of someone who would not be acknowledging that this arrangement made the child significantly better. The year Harry was 8, Thanos took him to a world that was in the process of destroying itself, not through conflict but through the slower violence of mismanagement and corruption, a planet with abundant resources and a ruling class that had architectured the entire system to ensure that abundance flowed one direction. Harry observed for 2 days. He watched the specific machinery of how it worked, not just the poverty, which was obvious, but the mechanisms, the ways the laws were written to make the theft legal, the ways the information environment was managed so that the population couldn't see the full picture. On the 3rd day he said to Thanos, "The people doing this believe they're justified." "Yes. They've built an entire framework that makes the theft look like management. They believe in it." "Yes. That's harder to fight than someone who knows they're wrong," Harry said. "Someone who knows they're wrong can be shown. Someone who believes they're right." He paused. "You have to change the framework, not the person. The person is a symptom of the system." Thanos looked at him. "And how would you change the framework?" Harry thought about it for 3 days, which was how he always worked on hard problems, not quickly, but thoroughly, turning the thing over until he understood its shape from every angle. He came back with an approach that used the reality stone to alter the specific legal architecture at the document level, the mind stone to shift the information environment toward accuracy without manipulation, and the space stone to accelerate the distribution of resources during the transition before the new system could function on its own. "It won't last without ongoing governance," Thanos said. "No. But it creates conditions where better governance is possible. And then it's up to them." Harry shrugged. "I can't do it for them forever. Minimum necessary." Thanos looked at him with an expression that had been appearing more frequently in the last year, something like the expression of someone who has given a gift they expected to get back and has found, to their surprise, that they don't want it returned. "When did you start applying my own principles to prove my own arguments wrong?" he asked. "I have always done that," Harry said, with perfect calm. The year Harry was 9, he stopped a war. Not a small conflict, an actual intercivilizational war between two species that had been building toward each other for 3 centuries, a clash of genuine grievances and misunderstandings amplified by propaganda and distance until both sides were mobilizing planet-class weaponry. Thanos had brought Harry to observe the diplomatic failure stage, the point at which every conventional approach had been tried and each side had decided that the other was fundamentally, irremediably wrong. Harry sat in on the final failed negotiation session, invisible in the back of the room, his soul stone showing him the full emotional landscape of both delegations, the fear dressed as certainty, the exhaustion dressed as righteousness, the specific grief of people who have invested so much in a war that stopping it would mean acknowledging what the investment cost. He watched it all and was quiet about it, his face still, his hands still. Afterward, walking back to the ship, Thanos said, "Your thoughts?" "Both sides have one person on each delegation who actually wants this to stop," Harry said. "Third chair on the left, blue-gray uniform. Second chair on the right, older. They've been watching each other all session and neither one has spoken up." Thanos was quiet. "They're afraid of their own sides," Harry continued. "The hardliners are louder and the quieter people have learned that speaking up is punished. So the war continues because the people who want it stopped have decided they can't say so. And your solution? Put those two in a room together. Just them. No delegation, no audience. Let the soul stone create a space where whatever they say won't leave the room." He paused. "They'll figure it out. They already know what needs to happen. They just need to know the other one knows it too." Thanos stopped walking. "You want to use the soul stone to create a zone of privacy and honesty. The stone doesn't force anything. It just," Harry touched his chest briefly, "makes it easier to mean what you say. Remove some of the noise. That is an application of the stone I have not seen before." "It hasn't been done before," Harry said, matter-of-factly. "I've been working on it." The meeting happened the next morning. Harry sat outside the room, he didn't go in, this was their conversation, not his, and held the stone's attention on the space within. He felt the two people inside the way you feel weather from a distance. Fear first, then the careful testing of it, then, the shift. The specific emotional transition that the soul stone showed him as a change in color that had no visual component, warm, then open, then the profound relief of two people who have been carrying something alone discovering simultaneously that they don't have to. The war talks resumed with new terms 2 days later. Thanos said nothing about it that evening. But Harry noticed that the course was adjusted, that they stopped somewhere they hadn't been planning to stop, and when Harry went to investigate, he found that Thanos had acquired, from somewhere, a worn copy of a human fairy tale book, different from the one Harry had brought from Privet Drive, but the same genre, the same kind of spine. He'd left it on Harry's bunk without comment. Harry held it for a moment, this enormous purple being's version of "I see you and I'm paying attention." Then he put it on the shelf with his other books, which had expanded considerably from the original two, and went back to what he was doing, smiling in a way he didn't feel the need to hide. The year Harry was 10, something new started happening with the Time Stone. It began as visions, not random, but pointed, the stone showing him specific sequences, scenes from places he hadn't been, conversations between people he hadn't met. It took him 3 weeks to understand that they weren't memories or hypotheticals. They were probable futures. Not fixed, the Time Stone, which understood temporal mechanics better than any other force in the universe, showed futures the way weather systems show rainfall projections, not as certainties but as weighted probabilities. He saw Hogwarts for the first time in a Time Stone vision. He saw the Great Hall with its floating candles and its 4 long tables, and he saw a child sitting at the Gryffindor table who had his face and his scar and absolutely nothing else in common with him, a boy who was startled and overwhelmed and who looked at the world around him with a constant faint fear that Harry felt like a phantom limb. He saw the cupboard door. Not as memory, as future, or near-future parallel, the version of him that would have existed without Thanos, without the stones, sitting in 37 inches of width and measuring the walls with his hands. Still doing it. Still measuring. 10 years old and still measuring the cage. Harry sat with that vision for a long time. Then he went to find Thanos. "I need to go back," he said. "To Earth." "Not yet," I have another year, I think, before the natural access point. But I need to go back. Thanos was at his usual workstation, running calculations on something. He looked up. Read Harry's face. You've seen something. I've seen what I would have been. Harry sat down across from him, straight-backed, his eyes clear. And I've seen what's coming. There's something there, Voldemort, a dark wizard, he's already tried to kill me once, that's what the scar is, and he's not finished. And there are people there who need, he paused, finding the word. Who need someone to show them that the world doesn't have to work the way they've been told it works. You want to attend the school, Thanos said. I want to go home, Harry said quietly, and then looked slightly surprised at himself for saying it that way. Thanos was quiet. Outside, whatever star they were near threw amber light through the observation port. Earth was not good to you, Thanos said. No. But it's mine. Harry met his eyes. You taught me that things being yours doesn't depend on whether they treat you well. You said, the things worth caring for don't always look after themselves. I said that about civilizations. I know. Another silence. Thanos looked at him, really looked at him, with the comprehensive attention of someone doing an accounting. 10 years old, but the bones and eyes of something considerably older. Calm without being cold. Warm without being soft. Something the universe had made precisely one of. 1 year, Thanos said. We finish your foundation year. Then you go. You'll come. When I need you. I will always come when you need me, Thanos said, simply and completely, like a fact about physics. Harry nodded. Then he stood, and crossed to the workstation, and looked at what Thanos was calculating, and said, your distribution model is off on the third column, by the way. The mass conversion ratio for the Cygnus sector changed last cycle. Thanos looked at the column. Looked at Harry. Since when do you review my work? Since always, Harry said, and corrected the column himself before Thanos could object. Outside, a star went about its business. The foundation year was quiet and deep and final in the way that last years are. Harry felt it, the time stone marking the shape of a period ending, and he took it seriously. He revisited every discipline, not to improve but to integrate, to find the places where combat and empathy and language and physics and the six-voice song of the stones all pointed to the same underlying thing. He spent 3 months doing nothing but sitting with the soul stone, learning the specific texture of different kinds of love, not romantic, not limited to human registers, the full range, the way a world more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 3, Platform 9 3/4. The thing about Diagon Alley was that it had absolutely no idea what had just walked into it. Harry stepped through the leaky cauldron's back entrance behind Hagrid, who had arrived at the place they were staying 3 days earlier with a motorbike, a letter, and the kind of overwhelming friendliness that made you feel immediately that the world was going to be fine, and stopped for 1 full second, just one, to take it in. The alley unfolded ahead of him in the particular London narrow way of a street that had been built for a different era and hadn't bothered updating its ambitions, crooked shopfronts stacked on top of each other at angles that suggested either magical structural support or a collective agreement to ignore gravity, owls in cages that swiveled their heads with professional assessment, a cart stacked with cauldrons that clinked against each other in a rhythm that was just off enough to be music. Witches and wizards moved through it with the comfort of people in their own world, robes of every color, arguments conducted in the middle of the street without anyone moving out of the way. Harry felt the reality stone stir in his chest, delighted. Blimey, you all right? Hagrid said, looking down at him. Hagrid was enormous in a way that was refreshing rather than threatening. The soul stone showed him as genuinely warm underneath the nervousness, nervous specifically because this moment mattered to him, because Harry mattered to him in a way that preceded their meeting and came from grief. From James and Lily. Harry had felt that the moment Hagrid knocked on the door and had been careful with it. I'm great, Harry said, and meant it, and walked forward. He had been to worlds that made Diagon Alley look like a village market. He had walked through civilizations that made the entire planet Earth look like a suburb. He knew this. But there was something in Diagon Alley that none of those places had, a specific gravity that the Soul Stone translated with complete accuracy. This was the world he'd been kept from. Not the world he couldn't access because of distance or circumstance, but the one that existed 20 miles from where he'd grown up and had been specifically, deliberately denied him. There was a texture to that. Harry walked through it and felt it without letting it slow him down. Gringotts rose at the end of the alley like a building that had taken the concept of permanence personally. Harry looked up at it as they approached. The goblins at the entrance regarded them with the professional disinterest of beings who had seen everything twice and been unimpressed both times. Inside, Hagrid presented his letter, and they were shown to a cart by a goblin named Griphook who drove with the commitment of someone who had long since stopped caring whether the passengers were enjoying themselves. Harry sat in the cart with his hands on his knees and watched the tunnels go past, feeling the deep stone around them, the enormous age of the vaults and the magic woven into the rock, the time stone giving him a sense of the depth of it, centuries of accumulated wards, each generation adding to the last, a genuine civilization running underneath the city. Vault 687 first. Hagrid's errand. Harry waited in the cart while Hagrid retrieved a small package. The Soul Stone noted Hagrid's care with it, the way he handled it like something he'd been trusted with and took that trust seriously, and then they went deeper, the temperature dropping, to Vault 713. No, first to Vault 687. And then, when Hagrid settled back in with his package tucked carefully in his enormous coat, the cart swung toward the deeper tunnels. Vault 687 gave way to Vault 713 the way shallow water gives way to depth, the same element but different in every way that mattered. The vault door was different, older, more layered, the wards dense enough that Harry could feel them against his skin like mild pressure even before Griphook applied the key. Inside was gold. Obviously. Mountains of it, in the Gringotts way, generations of Potter wealth accumulated into physical testimony that his parents had not been nothing, had not been the strange and inconvenient people Petunia described. Harry stood in the vault and looked at the gold and felt something that was not avarice and not surprise but was a quieter and more complicated reckoning, proof. Physical, vaultable proof that he had been lied to systematically about the basic facts of his own history. He took what was needed for school supplies and walked out of the vault with the same expression he'd walked in with, which Hagrid, watching carefully, found slightly hard to read. "You all right?" Hagrid asked again, on the cart going up. "My parents were real people," Harry said, not answering the question but answering something. Hagrid's face did something large and genuine. "The best," he said thickly. "The absolute best." Harry looked at him. The Soul Stone showed him the grief in full, the love in full, the specific devotion of someone who had known James and Lily and carried the memory of them the way you carry something you don't put down. "Tell me about them," Harry said. "While we shop. Tell me everything." Hagrid talked for 3 hours. Harry listened to all of it, which was the right thing to do and also genuinely what he wanted. He listened while they found his robes, Madame Malkin's, where a pale blonde boy was already being fitted on the next stand, who looked at Harry with the immediate assessment of someone raised to categorize, and opened his mouth, and Harry looked at him with polite attention and waited, and Draco Malfoy, in the middle of his prepared speech about broomsticks, lost the thread of it slightly. "Do you know what house you'll be in?" Draco tried, recovering. "Not yet," Harry said. "Do you?" "Slytherin. Obviously. My whole family's been Slytherin." He said it the way someone says something they've been told is a fact until they've stopped examining it. "What's your name?" "Harry." "Harry what?" Harry smiled at him. Not a performing smile, not warm exactly, just, open. "Potter," he said. The needle Madame Malkin was using paused. Draco went very still in the particular way of someone who has just discovered they've been having a casual conversation in what they thought was a paddling pool and has now looked down to find deep water. "Harry Potter?" Draco said. "Yes." "The Harry Potter?" "I assume so. I'm only aware of the one." Draco scrambled to reassemble his social architecture. The soul stone showed Harry the calculation happening in real time, status adjustment, reassessment, the rapid reorganizing of what this conversation was and what it might mean. It was pure product of his upbringing, automatic as breathing, and Harry watched it without judgment because he'd seen enough of the universe's various social hierarchies to understand that Draco Malfoy was doing the only thing his education had taught him to do. "You'll want to be careful about who you make friends with," Draco said, settling on the version of himself that felt most defensible. "I can help with that. Some families are better than others." Harry considered him. He was aware that this was the moment where the Draco's canon antagonist fork was most visible, the moment where condescension met either insecurity or certainty, and found very different outcomes in each. He chose honesty, because he had been in the universe for 7 years and honesty was almost always more useful than performance. "I appreciate that," Harry said. "But I'll figure out who to be friends with myself. I usually do." He said it without heat. The needle resumed. Draco opened his mouth again, and then something in Harry's expression, which hadn't changed, which was the point, made him close it. He was 10 and arrogant and unaccustomed to being met with this particular quality of calm, someone neither impressed nor hostile, just, steady. It was disconcerting. "Right," Draco said, after a pause. "Well. I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy." "I know," Harry said pleasantly. Draco blinked. "How? Your name's on the robe tag." "A beat." Then Harry smiled properly, and it was a good smile, genuine and slightly warm, and Draco Malfoy in spite of himself smiled back for about 3/4 of a second before catching himself and returning to his careful expression. They parted outside. Harry watched Draco walk away to 2 large figures who were clearly bodyguards rather than friends, and the soul stone showed him the specific loneliness in that, the particular shape of a child who has status instead of warmth, and Harry filed it away. Not as a problem to solve, not yet. Just as a thing that was true. Ollivander's was the last stop, because Harry had been saving it. He'd felt the wand situation from the moment they'd arrived in Diagon Alley, a distant resonance, nothing urgent, the faintest tug of the reality stone suggesting that something nearby was going to be interesting. He hadn't mentioned it to Hagrid because Hagrid was already overwhelmed with the emotional weight of the day, and because Harry had learned that you don't need to narrate what's about to happen when you can just let it happen. The bell above Ollivander's door made a sound that was less like a bell and more like an interruption, and the shop received them with the accumulated attention of 10,000 wands in their boxes, which was a particular sensation, like being examined by something that had opinions. Ollivander appeared from between the shelves the way people only appear when they've been waiting to appear. He was pale and large-eyed, and the soul stone showed Harry immediately that this was not a man who was impressed by conventional things but who was deeply, genuinely moved by specific ones, by craft, by precision, by the interesting case. He looked at Harry and went very still. Not at the scar. At the eyes. "Harry Potter," he said, softly. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you." Then he paused. "Your eyes are," he stopped. Started again. "Your mother had beautiful eyes. Green." He studied Harry's for another moment. "Yours are, He didn't finish the sentence. "Should we try some wands?" Harry said. Ollivander blinked himself back to the present. "Yes. Yes, of course. Let me see, arm out, if you please." The wands came. Harry held each one with courteous attention and felt them not match, not in the painful way, not wrong exactly, but approximate in the way that a word in a foreign language is approximate for a concept that the other language has a perfect specific term for. He felt the wands assessing him and finding themselves, individually and in sequence, not quite the right instrument. Ollivander, for his part, was getting progressively more animated in the way of a man who has encountered an interesting puzzle. He was disappearing into the back shelves more frequently, returning with boxes that he selected with increasing specificity, muttering to himself about cores and woods and lengths in the language of his particular obsession. On the 11th wand, something different happened. Not the wand itself, it didn't do the dramatic shower of sparks and golden light that seemed to be the expected script. What happened was subtler. The wand went quiet. It had been, up to this point, a wand in the sense that all objects are present in space and have their properties available. Now it simply settled. The way a compass settles when it finds north. The way the stones had settled when they'd entered Harry, that same quality of inevitable arrival. Harry felt it through his palm and looked down at it. Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, pliable. Good for transfiguration, excellent for charms work, carries a specific resonance that Ollivander would spend the next 8 years trying to fully articulate. Interesting, Ollivander said, watching him. His voice had changed register slightly. Very interesting. That wand, the phoenix who donated the feather for that wand gave only one other feather. The wand that gave you that scar carries its brother feather. Harry looked at the wand. Then at Ollivander. So we're connected. Voldemort's wand and mine. Ollivander flinched at the name, which Harry noted. Yes, he said, recovering. In a sense. I wonder, his large eyes were fully intent now, not performing the dramatic reveal but genuinely puzzling over something. I wonder which of you will triumph in the end. I will, Harry said, not unkindly. Just as a fact. Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. The soul stone showed Harry that the old wandmaker wasn't dismissing this, he was hearing the quality of it, the absence of bravado, the simple statement of someone who has calculated and reached a conclusion. Yes, Ollivander said quietly. I think you might. He paused. Be careful with that wand. It is quite capable of great things. So am I, Harry said, and paid for it, and walked out. Hagrid had ice cream waiting on the bench outside. He handed Harry's cone over with the expression of someone who had just had a large day and was glad it was almost over. Harry took it and sat down beside him and ate it without ceremony in the afternoon sun, and for a few minutes he was just a child with an ice cream in a busy street, unremarkable from the outside. Happy? Hagrid asked. Harry thought about it honestly. Yes, he said. Really yes. Hagrid beamed and got chocolate on his beard. The 1st of September arrived on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday and Harry arrived at King's Cross 45 minutes early, which was his habit. He liked the approach to new things, the liminal space before an arrival that let you calibrate. He had a trolley and a trunk and an owl he'd acquired in the alley, a snowy owl he'd known he wanted the moment he saw her, something in the spirit stone confirming the connection before he'd consciously decided, and he'd named her Hedwig because it was the name that arrived with the same certainty that good names always did. The platform was organized chaos in the way of large transportation hubs everywhere in every civilization Harry had been to, purpose and noise and the specific electricity of people about to go somewhere. He found the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 and walked through it without breaking stride because the space stone had been showing him the spatial fold since he entered the station and there was nothing remotely hidden about it from where he was standing. Platform 9 3/4 was extraordinary. Not in the way of the places he'd been, it was not the floating mountains of Vormir or the amethyst sky of the first world Thanos had taken him to. It was extraordinary in the specific way of human things that have been made with real care and real magic and real intention, the Hogwarts Express, red and steaming and enormous, running the length of the platform like a declaration. The crowd, children mostly, many Harry's age, some older, some younger, all in various states of excitement or nerves or studied nonchalance, moved around it with the specific energy of people at a threshold. Harry stood on the platform and breathed it in and felt, with the soul stone's quiet accuracy, the weight of it, all these children going to a place that was genuinely trying to teach them something. A flawed place, he already knew that, the time stone had shown him enough to understand its complications. But a trying one. There was something in that worth respecting. He found a compartment, stowed his trunk, settled Hedwig, and sat by the window. He watched the platform. He watched families say goodbye, the Weasley family in particular, impossible to miss, red-haired and enormous in number, the mother with the specific worried love of someone who has sent children to this train before and knows it doesn't get easier. He watched a boy with red hair who was clearly the youngest of that family and who was being sent off with a combination of warmth and teasing that landed on him in layers. The train began to fill. Harry read. The compartment door opened 20 minutes before departure and the red-haired boy looked in. Mind if everywhere else is full, he said. Go ahead, Harry said, and meant it, and moved his bag. The boy sat down with the slightly collapsed relief of someone who had been checking compartments for a while. He looked at Harry with the open assessment of someone who hadn't yet learned to perform not looking. I'm Ron. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter. Ron's reaction was different from Draco's, not the rapid recalculation of social hierarchy, but something more immediate and genuine, a flash of actual surprise followed by something that the Soul Stone showed as simply, this is interesting. Are you really? Ron said. Have you really got? He leaned forward. Can I see? Harry pushed his fringe back. Ron looked at the scar with the frank curiosity of someone who has grown up with the story attached to it and has never been close to the actual artifact. Wicked, he said admiringly. Thanks, Harry said. Does it hurt? No. My mum says you're, Ron paused, editing himself. Famous. She says you're very famous. Apparently, Harry said. Ron seemed to assess whether this was going to be a thing between them, the famousness, and arrived at a conclusion. Does it bother you? The famous thing? Harry looked at him. The Soul Stone showed him the directness in the question, genuine rather than tactical, the specific quality of someone who asks what they want to know rather than working around it. He liked it immediately. Not particularly, he said honestly. I didn't do anything. I was 1 year old. Being famous for something you didn't do is basically just being a story other people tell. Ron considered this. That's actually, yeah, that makes sense. He settled back with the ease of someone who has been given something to think about that he finds genuinely interesting. I've got loads of brothers. They all did loads of famous things at Hogwarts. Sometimes it's like being in a story other people are already telling. Yeah, Harry said quietly. Exactly that. They ate every sweet on the trolley, or tried to, there were a significant number, and Ron explained every type of wizarding sweet with the authority of someone who has 6 older siblings as field researchers, and Harry ate Bertie Bott's every flavor beans with the empirical openness of someone whose palate had been broadened by 7 years of alien cuisine and found even the earwax one philosophically manageable, and the compartment door opened a third time. Hermione Granger came in looking for a lost toad belonging to a round-faced, anxious boy who introduced himself as Neville Longbottom and looked at everything like it was about to fall on him. Harry found Neville's toad Trevor in approximately 4 seconds, the Soul Stone simply knowing where small frightened things were hiding, and delivered him gently, and Neville looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has been helped by someone with no apparent agenda and has been given, briefly, a different data point for what people can be. Hermione, who had been conducting a toad search with the organized efficiency of someone who had already read all applicable books on toad behavior, registered the result with a quick look at Harry that recalibrated. How did you? She stopped. Started again. I'm Hermione Granger. Harry Potter. She didn't do the Draco thing or the Ron thing. She looked at him the way someone looks at a problem they've decided to take seriously, and said, I've read about you. In the rise and fall of the dark arts and notable magical names of our time and the entry in a history of magic. What do they say? She gave him a precise summary, 3 minutes, well organized. Harry listened with genuine interest, because there was information in how a story gets told that is separate from whether the story is accurate. He noted the gaps in the official account, the things that had been smoothed over or mythologized, the places where the narrative served a purpose. Is any of it right? Hermione asked when she'd finished. Some of it, Harry said. The basic facts of what happened are approximately correct. The interpretation is someone else's. She looked at him for a moment with those very precise brown eyes. The Soul Stone showed Harry something interesting in her, a mind that was genuinely hungry, not performatively, not for status, but the real kind that has loved knowing things since before it understood why, the kind that is most alive when it's actively working on something. He recognized it. He had it himself. "Which books would you recommend?" she said. "For actual accuracy." "I can give you a list," Harry said, "but most of the most accurate sources aren't in the Hogwarts library." She looked mildly scandalized by this, in the way of someone for whom not in the library was nearly equivalent to doesn't exist. "Where are they?" "Some are off-world," Harry said. A pause. Ron looked between them. "Off," he started. "I've been around," Harry said simply, and reached into his bag and found a piece of parchment and wrote down 7 titles, 5 of them in English and 2 in languages he transliterated carefully. He handed the list to Hermione. She looked at the titles. Then at Harry. Then at the 2 non-English titles. "What language is this one?" "Ancient Cree." "And that one's a dialect of the Shi'ar scholars' tongue." "I can translate them for you, or teach you the languages if you want." The compartment was quiet. Ron had a chocolate frog held halfway to his mouth and had forgotten to finish eating it. Hermione's expression went through several stages rapidly: skepticism, assessment, the specific quality of a person who has decided that the most interesting thing to do right now is take this seriously and see where it goes. "You know alien languages," she said. "Several, yes." "How?" "I've lived off-world for 7 years." She looked at him steadily. He looked back. The train moved beneath them, the countryside outside the window beginning to unspool in its green September way. She sat down across from him, which was her answer. Ron finished his chocolate frog. Neville held Trevor to his chest and watched everyone with the attention of someone who has decided this compartment is much more interesting than he expected. "Start from the beginning," Hermione said. Harry thought about where the beginning was. He thought about a cupboard 37 inches wide, and a corner that folded, and purple hands holding an empty gauntlet. He thought about the gardens of a floating mountain and 3 moons in an amethyst sky. "It starts with a cupboard," he said. "And a very large person who wasn't from around here." He told them. Not everything, not the deepest things, those belonged to him and to Thanos and to the silence between them. But the shape of it, the broad strokes, the key facts. He told it the way he'd learned to tell things from 7 years of navigating worlds that needed information efficiently, clearly, with appropriate detail, without editorializing except where the editorializing was the truth. Ron listened with the growing expression of someone whose understanding of the category interesting life was being fundamentally revised. Hermione listened with a notebook that appeared from somewhere and a hand that was writing with the automatic function of someone who cannot not document new information. Neville listened with his toad and his wide eyes and didn't say anything, but at the end asked quietly, Did you like it? Out there?" "Yes," Harry said. "Weren't you scared?" "Of all of it?" Harry thought about this honestly. "Sometimes," he said. "But mostly," he looked out the window at England going past, green and grey and very small, as planets went. "Mostly it was just interesting. There's so much out there. It's hard to be scared when you're busy being interested." Neville looked at the window too, with an expression that was wistful and thoughtful in equal measure. The train arrived at Hogsmeade Station in the dark, which was the correct way to arrive anywhere for the first time, night giving everything the quality of a possibility rather than a fact. Hagrid's voice boomed out of the darkness, "Fur's years, this way," and Harry followed the voice and found Hagrid and felt the soul stone register Hagrid's look of relief at seeing him, which was deeply genuine and made Harry feel the specific warmth of being expected and wanted. The boats across the lake were perfect. The dark water and the October air and then Hogwarts appearing above the hill, lit, enormous, older than most things on the planet in the sense that mattered, not just years but intention, the accumulated intention of everyone who had ever learned something in its walls. Harry looked at it and felt the time-stone hum in recognition and felt, more than saw, the layered history of the place, centuries of students and teachers and transformations and all the particular magic of humans trying to make each other better. He thought, I'm home. Then he thought, that's not quite right. Then he thought, but it's not quite wrong either. The entrance hall received them with candles and stone, and Professor McGonagall, who was precisely as the time stone had shown her, a woman who had decided at some point that the most efficient way to move through the world was to be entirely herself, no adjustments, and had found this to be correct. She looked at the first years assembled before her with the comprehensive assessment of someone who had been doing this for decades and still took each cohort seriously. She looked at Harry. Her expression was the most controlled of anyone he'd met so far, but the soul stone noted what was underneath it: awareness, caution, a dozen questions running in parallel, and underneath those, something gentler, older, carrying the same James and Lily weight that Hagrid carried, but held differently, with more formality and no less care. "Mr. Potter," she said, when she reached him in the line. "Professor McGonagall," he said. A slight pause. She hadn't expected to be named. "You've done your research," she said. "Hermione's notes," Harry said, nodding at Hermione, who stood 3 students down and looked briefly mortified and then lifted her chin. McGonagall's expression did something that in a less controlled face would have been a smile. "Indeed. Shall we proceed?" The Great Hall was exactly what the time stone had shown him, which somehow didn't diminish it. The floating candles, the 4 long tables, the ceiling that was the October night sky. The students already seated turned to look at the incoming first years with the varied mixture of boredom, anticipation, and performance that older students apply to the events of younger ones. Harry felt several hundred soulstone data points arrive simultaneously: the general emotional temperature of the room, the specific clusters of attention, the 2 brightest points of focused interest, a table of green and silver students who were paying careful attention, and the high table, where, he felt Dumbledore before he looked at him. Not with the soul stone, exactly. With the stones collectively, all 6 of them registering a presence that was simultaneously warm and structural, something that had been expecting him, had been arranging around his expected arrival for a long time, the way a lock arranges around the expected key. He looked at the high table. Albus Dumbledore was looking back. He was exactly what Harry had expected from the time stone's visions, and considerably more than that in person, old in the way that specific human beings are old, not just years but choices, the particular age of someone who has made many of them and carried each one forward. He wore the warmth like a garment, genuinely and practiced simultaneously. His eyes, behind the half-moon spectacles, were brilliant and sharply moving and currently fixed on Harry with an attention that was carefully costumed as benevolent interest. The soul stone showed Harry what was underneath the costume. Surprise. Deep, carefully contained surprise, not at Harry being here. Harry being here had been the plan, but at Harry being this. The eyes, specifically. The absence of the expected quality, the lost child, the overwhelmed newcomer, the blank page that was supposed to receive its inscription at Dumbledore's hand. The plan had required a certain Harry Potter, and the Harry Potter standing in the Great Hall was simply, comprehensively, not that. Harry held the headmaster's gaze for 3 seconds, long enough to be deliberate and short enough to be unremarkable, and then looked away at the rest of the hall with exactly the same interest he'd given everything else. The Sorting Hat went through its song, which Harry found genuinely charming. A hat that had developed a philosophy and insisted on sharing it annually was something he could respect. Names were called. Hermione went to Gryffindor with a ferocity that seemed almost structural, like she'd willed it. Neville went to Gryffindor with the expression of someone who had braced for the worst and been given something unexpectedly good. Ron went to Gryffindor, which was obviously where the Weasleys went. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet in a specific way, not the quiet of indifference but the quiet of several hundred people deciding to pay attention. Harry walked to the stool, sat down, and put the hat on. The hat dropped over his eyes and immediately said, in his head, in the voice of something very old, "Oh." Harry waited. "I have sorted 4,912 students in my tenure," the hat said, "and I have never." It paused. Harry felt it exploring, which was not unpleasant, more like someone reading a room than rifling through a drawer. "There's a great deal of you," it observed. "Yes," Harry agreed. "The stones." "Yes." And underneath them, let me see. Courage. Yes, obviously. Considerable intelligence, very considerable. Loyalty, deep. Ambition, it paused here. Interesting. Your ambition isn't conventional. It isn't about position or status. It's about scope. I want to do things that matter, Harry said simply. As large as they need to be. The hat was quiet for a moment, doing its assessing. You could go anywhere, you know. That's not flattery. It's genuinely true. There isn't a house that wouldn't benefit from you. Then put me where I can do the most good, Harry said. Where the people who need someone to show them something are. Now that, the hat said, with something that felt like respect in its ancient, stitched voice, is a Gryffindor answer. A brief pause. Though your Slytherin would be exceptional. And your Ravenclaw, Gryffindor, Harry said, not impatiently. Yes, the hat agreed. And then, more quietly, almost to itself, good luck, Harry Potter. I mean that genuinely. The things that are coming, I know, Harry said. Do you? Yes. Another pause. Then you're ready. And then, aloud, for the hall, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, handed it to McGonagall, who looked at him with slightly altered eyes, the soul stone catching a flash of well then running underneath her composed surface, and walked to the red and gold table where Ron was making room with enthusiastic arm movements and Hermione was applauding in the precise way of someone who had expected this outcome and was satisfied with the confirmation. Harry sat down. The feast appeared. He ate. He was aware of the eyes on him, not uniformly, but specifically. The Slytherin table was doing a coordinated assessment that had Draco Malfoy at its center, recalibrating from the Madame Malkin's meeting. The Ravenclaw table had several people who seemed to be discussing him in the academic sense, which he found flattering. The Hufflepuff table mostly went back to eating, which he found equally flattering in a different way. And at the High table, Dumbledore had not gone back to eating. He was watching Harry with the specific quality of someone revising a very old, very confident plan. But there was something else at the High table that the Soul Stone caught more urgently, a professor in a purple turban who had been looking at Harry since he walked in and was continuing to look at him with an intensity that was out of register with everything else in the room. Not curiosity. Not assessment. Something older and darker and aimed. Harry ate a chicken wing and felt the thing in Professor Quirrell's turban feel him back. He set the chicken wing down and looked up at the ceiling, the gorgeous, candlelit, October sky ceiling, and thought about the Time Stone's visions of what was in that turban and what it wanted and what was coming. Then he looked at Ron, who was explaining the hierarchy of Hogwarts ghosts with the authority of someone with a working family archive, and at Hermione, who was correcting Ron's chronology with good-natured precision, and at Neville, who was feeding Trevor a piece of his roll when he thought no one was looking. Harry smiled. He picked up the chicken wing again and ate it and decided, very simply, that things were going to be fine, not because nothing bad was coming, the Time Stone had been entirely clear about that, but because he was here, and he was ready, and the people sitting around him were all ready, in the small specific ways of the first hours of friendship, becoming people worth being ready for. Dumbledore raised a glass across the hall. Harry caught his eye. He raised his own pumpkin juice in return, level and pleasant, and felt the headmaster understand, in the particular way that very intelligent people understand things they didn't expect, that the plan was going to need revising. Harry drank his juice. The feast continued. Chapter 4, The School That Didn't Know What It Had. The dungeons of Hogwarts had a smell that was specific and permanent, cold stone and something herbal underneath it, the residue of 1,000 years of potions work soaked into the walls until the walls themselves had opinions about chemistry. Harry followed the first-year Gryffindors down the stairs on the first Thursday of term and noted the smell the way he noted everything, filed, catalogued, interesting. Snape's classroom was already occupied when they arrived. Not by students, the room itself was occupied, in the sense that it had been arranged with deliberate intention, the ingredient jars lining the walls like an audience, the worktables set at intervals that enforced a specific social geometry, the professor's desk positioned at the front with the precise authority of a person who thought carefully about where they stood. Harry sat next to Ron, who was already scanning the ingredient jars with the expression of someone doing threat assessment. "The one on the far right has something moving in it," Ron said quietly. "Flobberworm," Harry said. "You can tell from here." "The jar's labeled." Ron squinted. "Oh." Severus Snape entered without announcement, which was a specific pedagogical choice. The door opened and he was simply there, black robes and controlled movement and an expression that had been engineered over years into something that conveyed authority through restraint rather than volume. He looked at the class with the comprehensive attention of someone taking inventory. His gaze crossed Harry and stopped. Harry looked back at him with polite interest. The Soul Stone showed Harry Snape in full in that 3-second look. Not completely, the Soul Stone never gave you everything, but the broad shape of the man, grief that had calcified into something structural, like scar tissue that had become bone. Intelligence vast and underappreciated and deeply aware of both. Anger that served as insulation around something it was not prepared to examine. And underneath all of it, visible only as an undertone the way bass frequencies are felt rather than heard, a devotion so old it had become geological, attached to a name Harry recognized because it was his mother's. He noted all of this and kept his expression exactly as it was. "You are here," Snape said, "to the class in general and no one specifically, because you have demonstrated sufficient magical ability to be sorted into this school. You are not here because you are talented. Talent is what you have when you arrive. This," he moved to the board without looking at it and wrote a single word, "mastery," in precise chalk letters, "is what you earn. The difference between the two is whether you are willing to be uncomfortable." He turned back to the class. "Potter." "Yes," Harry said. Snape's eyes narrowed by a fraction, not at the content but at the tone, which was not the tone he'd expected. Not nervous, not eager. Just present. "Tell me the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane." "They're the same plant," Harry said. "Also called aconite. The name depends on regional tradition and application context. Monkshood in most European herbology traditions, wolfsbane in defense-adjacent literature because of the historical use in werewolf-related preparations, aconite in formal potions taxonomy." A pause in the room. The Soul Stone caught the specific quality of 30 students recalibrating simultaneously. Snape looked at him. His expression hadn't changed, which was information in itself. He had expected either a wrong answer he could use or a right answer delivered with the self-satisfaction he could equally use. He had not expected a right answer delivered with the flatness of someone reciting established fact rather than performing knowledge. "Where a bezoar is found," Snape said, pressing forward. "Stomach of a goat. Functions as an antidote for most common poisons by binding to the toxic compounds before gastric absorption, though the mechanism varies depending on the poison class and there are documented cases of bezoars being ineffective against synthetic or magically augmented toxins." Another pause. "The preparation of a forgetfulness potion requires Lethe river water, mistletoe berries, valerian sprigs, standard base. The critical step is the order of addition, valerian before mistletoe or the base separation destabilizes the memory targeting compound. There's a variation using, that's sufficient," Snape said. Harry stopped. The classroom was very quiet. Snape looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was doing several things at once and showing none of them. He was looking at the eyes, Harry noticed, the way Ollivander had, the way Dumbledore had, the way everyone who was paying enough attention did. Something in the eyes announced a depth that the face kept neutral, and it was disconcerting for people who expected to read a child like a children's book. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, which clearly cost him something he would not be naming. He moved on to the lesson. The lesson was on basic preparation technique, which Harry found genuinely interesting not because it was challenging but because it was precise, and precision was a thing he respected in any discipline. He worked through the practical exercise with the specific quality of attention he applied to everything, the same attention he'd applied to moon moving and war stopping in combat drills, present and methodical. His potion came out the correct shade of pale green and the correct viscosity, and he cleaned his workspace and waited. Ron's potion was a concerning gray. Ron looked at it with the expression of a person who had followed all the instructions and had produced something that suggested the instructions and the outcome had not been in communication. "What did you do at step 4? Harry asked quietly. "Added the roots. Crushed or whole?" Ron looked at him. "It didn't say which. It didn't specify because it's assumed. Whole roots release the compound too slowly for the base temperature. Crushed releases it too fast. Sliced. 3 mm cross-sections." Ron looked at his gray potion with new philosophical acceptance. "Could have used that 10 minutes ago." "I know. I was doing my own." "Fair." Snape moved through the class. He paused at their workstation and looked at Harry's potion, then at Ron's, then at Harry. "Are you his tutor, Potter?" "No," Harry said. "We were talking. Your potion." Harry pushed it forward slightly. Snape looked at it with the assessment of someone who needed no instrument to read the result and found himself reading a result he could not fault. He said nothing, which was its own statement, and moved to the next table. Ron exhaled. "He hates me," he said. "He doesn't know you yet," Harry said. "Give him time. My brothers say he's hated Weasley specifically for years. He has a complicated relationship with a lot of things," Harry said, which was accurate without being more than Ron needed right now. "It doesn't mean he's not a good teacher." Ron looked at him with the expression of someone deciding whether to argue this point and concluding it was too early in the day. "You actually liked the lesson," he said, with mild accusation. "I liked the precision," Harry said. "The chemistry is genuinely interesting." "You're a strange person," Ron said, not unkindly. "I've been told," Harry said, and started cleaning up. Defense against the dark arts was different. The classroom was on the 3rd floor and smelled of something burnt and lavender, which was an unusual combination that Harry clocked before he entered, the Soul Stone noting the quality of it, something layered, like a smell covering another smell. He sat at the front. Hermione sat beside him, which had become natural in 2 weeks, the two of them occupying the front row space with different energies, Hermione with her notebooks arrayed, Harry with nothing on the desk, which Hermione had already tried to fix twice by offering spare parchment. "You should at least look like you're taking notes," she said. "I'll remember it," Harry said. "That's not the point. It sends a message to the—" She stopped. "You don't care about sending messages to professors." "I care about the accurate ones," Harry said. "I just remember things." She looked at him for a moment. "Then, everything?" "Most things. The stones help." She processed this. Opened her notebook. "I'm still taking notes," she said, "as a matter of principle." "I know. That's why I'm not," Harry said, with the specific logic of someone who has considered the information coverage from multiple angles, and Hermione looked at him and made a small frustrated sound that was mostly suppressing being amused. Quirrell arrived. He came in with the stammer already deployed, the turban already in place, the performance already running, and Harry, who had felt the thing in the turban since the feast and had been paying careful attention to the space around it for 2 weeks, felt at the moment Quirrell entered the room the way you feel a change in pressure. Not the man, specifically, Quirrell himself was genuinely frightened, the Soul Stone showed that clearly, a man trapped in the machinery of someone else's plan and too deep in to stop it. The thing sharing his skull was something else. It felt Harry back. 2 weeks earlier, at the feast, there had been a moment of mutual awareness, something like 2 people in a dark room both realizing they are not alone. Since then, whatever was in Quirrell's turban had been careful. Contained. It did not look at Harry directly in the corridors and did not linger near him and had been, as far as Harry could tell, actively managing the encounter it knew was coming. Today, in the classroom, it had no choice. Quirrell began the lesson with the stammer and the excessive pleasantness, talking about vampires in a way that suggested someone who had read about vampires carefully but found them fundamentally embarrassing. Harry listened. The soul stone parsed Quirrell from the thing behind Quirrell simultaneously, tracking both, Quirrell's surface mind, anxious and performing, and the deeper current beneath it, cold and focused and doing its own assessment of the room. The thing in the turban was intelligent. Harry had known this from the visions, but feeling it directly was different, the specific quality of an ancient malice that had been practicing patience because it had no other option, making itself small and contained and waiting. It was not nothing. It was, in fact, quite something. Harry acknowledged this the way he acknowledged any significant thing, without drama, with appropriate weight. It was also, compared to what Harry had encountered in 7 years of cosmic education, not in the top tier of existential threats he'd assessed. This was an important distinction. He filed it. Any Q questions? Quirrell concluded, at the end of a section on vampire vulnerabilities that had been approximately 50% accurate. Harry raised his hand. Quirrell's eyes landed on him and the thing inside Quirrell noticed, and for 1/2 second the stammer slipped. Why yes, Mr. Potter. The garlic thing is mostly myth, Harry said. The actual photosensitivity mechanism is a curse interaction, not a biological one. Garlic interferes with the blood magic that sustains vampiric transformation under certain conditions, but it doesn't work universally and hasn't been an effective deterrent in documented encounters since roughly the 14th century. The current consensus in most serious dark creature research, he glanced at Hermione, who was writing with increased speed and hadn't looked up, uses threshold binding and specific light frequency charms instead. Quirrell blinked. The stammer operated on its own for a moment without attached words. Where did you, Corvitha's Compendium of Blood-Bound Entities, Harry said. It's not in the Hogwarts library. I can lend it to you if you want. The classroom was doing the specific kind of silence that happened when something interesting had occurred and nobody wanted to break it by reacting. The soul stone showed Harry the full spectrum, Hermione's focused pleasure at accurate information, Ron's suppressed grin, the general first-year mixture of nervousness and delight, and Quirrell's layered response, Quirrell's personal mind caught between gratitude and alarm, and underneath, the thing in his turban doing something that was not quite anger and not quite calculation but was the cold attentive reassessment of something that had underestimated what it was dealing with. Good, Harry thought. Better to know now than later. Thank you, Mr. Potter, Quirrell said, with the specific tone of someone choosing de-escalation. Of course, Harry said pleasantly. Walking out after class, Ron fell into step beside him and said, You corrected the defense teacher in the first lesson. The information was wrong, Harry said. McGonagall's going to hear about that before dinner. Probably. You don't care. The information was wrong, Harry repeated, simply. Ron considered this. Are you going to do that in every class? Only when the information is wrong. Ron looked at the ceiling as they walked. This is going to be a very interesting year, he said. Hermione caught up with them on the stairs. She had her notebook pressed to her chest. The Corvith Compendium, she said. Is it in multiple volumes? 7, Harry said. Can I borrow volumes 2 through 7 after you've lent volume 1 to Quirrell? You can have all 7, Harry said. I've finished with them. She looked at him. Then at the stairs. Then back at him. Where are they? My trunk. Come by tomorrow morning. Bring your own notes. The margins of my copies have annotations in 4 languages and it'll be confusing unless you can read them. Which 4 languages? English, Ancient Cree, Shi'ar, and one that doesn't have a formal name in Earth taxonomy but translates roughly as the academic dialect of a species called the Watchers. They're very thorough. Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. The Watchers, she said carefully. The beings that observe but do not interfere in cosmic events. Harry looked at her sideways. You know about the Watchers. I read broadly, she said, which was the most Hermione Granger sentence in any universe. Their academic dialect is worth learning, Harry said. Their classification system for magical phenomena is more accurate than any Earth-based taxonomy. I can teach you. She was quiet for 3 seconds, which was Hermione Granger's version of being at a loss for words. Then, yes. Please. Ron looked between them. I'll just stick to English, he said, and they all went down to dinner. The first Quidditch practice was a Friday morning, grey sky and damp pitch, the kind of English autumn morning that couldn't decide between rain and the threat of it. Harry arrived with his borrowed school broom. His Nimbus 2000 was en route, ordered through a specific channel that didn't involve Diagon Alley because Harry had opinions about broom models and they had not been manufactured on Earth, and found Oliver Wood already there, demonstrating a love for Quidditch that could have been classified as a medical condition. Harry listened to the rules run down with appropriate patience, because he did know the rules. The Time Stone had covered Quidditch weeks before arrival, but Oliver clearly needed to give the speech. It was important to let people give their speeches. He held the borrowed broom and waited. When Oliver launched into Seeker Theory, Harry raised his hand. Can we fly? Oliver blinked. I'm still, I understand the theory. The practice is what I need. He said it without impatience, without dismissal, genuinely, because it was true. He'd flown. Other things, in other contexts, the space stone making directional movement through air trivially manageable. But a broom was a specific instrument and instruments rewarded practice. Oliver, who valued nothing more than someone who wanted to actually get on a broom, let it go. All right then. Mount up. Harry kicked off. The first thing was the broom. It was a school broom, which meant it had opinions and had been accumulating those opinions over many years of being handled inconsistently, and it flew the way something does when it has been traumatized by committee. Harry made the immediate adjustment of a rider learning a horse's specific character and got it moving in a workable direction. The second thing was the sky. He had been in the sky, by extension, for 7 years. Vacuum, atmosphere, the atmospheres of worlds with different compositions. But there was something in the specific English autumn sky above the Quidditch pitch that the space stone resonated with differently. Home, that word again, inexact but persistent. He flew into the grey and let the wind come at him and didn't do anything fancy, just flew the pitch, reading it with the awareness of someone who processes space naturally. Oliver was watching from below with the expression of a man watching something confirm a belief he'd held. On the third circuit, Harry spotted the practice snitch. It wasn't trying to be hidden. Practice snitches didn't have full golden snitch behavior, their evasion subroutines were simplified, which was fine for learning basic pursuit lines. He tracked it for 30 seconds, mapping its pattern, then went after it. He caught it on the first pass. Not perfectly. The technique was rough because the broom was variable and the approach angle wasn't optimal. But he caught it, and he held it up for Oliver to see, and Oliver made a sound on the ground that suggested the morning had exceeded his expectations. Do it again, Oliver called up. Harry let the snitch go. Caught it again, 12 seconds. Different approach angle, better. Third time, 9 seconds, optimal line. He came back to the ground and handed the snitch to Oliver and shook out his right hand, which had the specific ache of gripping unfamiliar equipment. Oliver held the snitch and looked at Harry with the pure expression of someone whose team was going to be quite good this year. Where did you learn to fly? He asked. I haven't, Harry said. This is the first time on a broom. Oliver looked at him. Then at the snitch. Then at the sky. Then at Harry again. 9 seconds, he said. The approach angle on the third one was better. I think I can do it in 6 with the right broom. Oliver sat down on the grass with the air of a man making peace with being in the presence of something that didn't fit his existing categories. The Nimbus 2000, he said slowly. It should arrive by Thursday, Harry said. Oliver looked at the grey sky above the pitch with an expression of genuine reverence. Right, he said. Right. Thursday, then. Dumbledore called Harry to his office on the second Saturday of October. The invitation came through McGonagall, who delivered it with the careful neutrality of someone relaying a message and not editorializing, which was itself a kind of editorial. Harry went up the moving staircase to the headmaster's office at the appointed time and knocked. "Come in, Harry." The office was extraordinary in the way of rooms that have been lived in by someone specific for a very long time, every surface expressing a personality, the silver instruments whirring on their stands, the portraits of previous headmasters arranged on the walls in their various states of attention, Fawkes the Phoenix on his perch, and behind the enormous desk, Dumbledore, who had clearly arranged himself in a way that was comfortable and wise and welcoming and had been thinking about this meeting for some time. Harry sat down in the indicated chair and looked at the lemon drop that appeared in a dish in front of him. He took one, because accepting offered food was good manners, and because it was lemon. "How are you finding Hogwarts?" Dumbledore asked. "Wonderful," Harry said, and meant it. Dumbledore's eyes moved over him with the specific quality of someone who is having two conversations simultaneously, the surface one and the assessment running underneath. His tone was warm and grandfatherly and careful. He was, Harry thought, genuinely brilliant. One of the most intelligent humans he'd encountered on Earth, and considerably more than that by most standards. The Soul Stone showed him the complexity in full, the genuine care, the genuine cunning, the architecture of plans laid over decades, and the specific current disturbance that Harry's arrival had introduced to those plans. Dumbledore had wanted a particular kind of Harry Potter. "I wonder," Dumbledore said, after some minutes of conversation about classes and friends and the general texture of first-year life, his voice unchanged, "if I might ask about your time before Hogwarts. It must have been quite extraordinary." "It was," Harry said. "Thanos," Dumbledore said, and watched for the reaction. Harry gave him the expression of someone who has been asked about a family member. "Yes. He found me when I was 4. And in the intervening years, he raised me," Harry said. "Trained me. Taught me." He paused. "He's the most important person in my life." Dumbledore absorbed this. "He is a being of considerable," he chose words carefully, "complexity. His history suggests motivations that are not always," he changed, Harry said. "People do." He said it without edge, as simple reportage. "His philosophy when I met him was flawed. We talked about it. He reconsidered. That's how it works when you take ideas seriously." "You argued him out of his philosophy?" Dumbledore said, very gently, in the tone of someone who knows that tone conveys a certain skepticism and has chosen it deliberately. "Over time." "Yes." Harry looked at him steadily. "Does that seem unlikely?" "It seems." Dumbledore paused. "Remarkable. For a child." "I had good arguments," Harry said. "And he's honest. Those are the only two requirements for changing a mind." Dumbledore looked at him for a moment with the particular expression of someone who has used these exact conditions, good arguments, honest interlocutor, to change minds himself, and who recognizes them being turned back at him from an unexpected direction. Something shifted in his eyes. Not a lot. Enough to notice, if you were paying the kind of attention Harry was paying. "The Infinity Stones," Dumbledore said, and watched again. "Yes," Harry said. "They're, in me." "Yes." "All 6. "Yes." A pause that was long enough to be substantive. Dumbledore's hands, folded on the desk, stayed perfectly still, which was information about what he was feeling. "And you are, well, comfortable?" "There are no," he searched for a word, "conflicts. Between the stones and your own, we're integrated," Harry said. "It's not a conflict. It's more like," he thought of the lamp moths on the floating mountain, of the way they'd come to him without caution, having a very good ear for music. "The world is music and I hear more of it than I used to." Dumbledore looked at him. The warm expression was intact but something behind it had changed quality, the Soul Stone showing Harry a rapid internal reorganization, the plan architecture shifting in real time as new information refused to fit the old model. "Harry," he said, And the name had warmth in it that was genuine and also, simultaneously, a very precise instrument. I want you to know that whatever you've experienced out there, the things you've seen and learned, Hogwarts is a place of safety. You are a child, and children deserve to be. I'm fine, Harry said, not unkindly. I appreciate the concern. Genuinely. He meant that. The Soul Stone showed him that some of it was real, that Dumbledore's care for him had a genuine foundation even tangled with the strategy. But I'm not in distress. I'm not overwhelmed. I don't need managing. He held Dumbledore's eyes. Is there something specific you wanted to talk about? The warm expression did something at the edges. It didn't fall, Dumbledore was too good for it to fall, but it reconfigured slightly, the way a very skilled card player reconfigures when they realize the game being played is not the game they prepared for. The stone, he said, after a moment. The Philosopher's Stone. You know about it. Yes, Harry said. And you know why it's here. You're using it as bait, Harry said. Voldemort is going to try for it. You've set up the protections as an obstacle course rather than an actual deterrent. They're designed to be passable by a capable adult wizard, or a very talented child, and you want him to try. You want to understand how he's moving, what form he's in, what he needs. The stone is intelligence, not treasure. Dumbledore was very still. It's a good plan, Harry added, for the information-gathering goal. The problem is the collateral. Students are in the building. The corridor is nominally off-limits, which means it's specifically interesting to a certain category of student. And the thing wearing Quirrell is already in the school, which you know, which means the obstacle course is going to be used this year, this term, probably before the holidays. Dumbledore held his gaze for 4 seconds that were doing significant work. You are aware of Quirrell, he said. Since the feast, Harry said. The presence in his turban has been aware of me for roughly the same period. And you haven't done anything about it yet? No. Harry leaned back slightly, comfortable. I'm learning the school. I'm learning the people. There's no urgency that outweighs that. When it becomes necessary, I'll act. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. What I'm saying is, you don't need to keep the plan from me. I can work with you rather than around you. But I can't do that if you're managing the information I receive. The office was quiet except for Fawkes, who made a soft sound on his perch and looked at Harry with the golden attention of something very old and not at all surprised. Dumbledore looked at his folded hands for a long moment. When he looked up, something in his expression had changed in a way that was, the Soul Stone showed Harry, genuine, the specific shift of a very intelligent person choosing honesty because they have reassessed the costs of the alternative. You are not what I expected, he said. I know, Harry said. What did you expect? A pause. A child who had survived something terrible and needed guidance. I did survive something terrible, Harry said. I also got everything else. He held the old man's gaze. The guidance I got was honest. Whatever you offered would have been, something else. Better than the alternative of the cupboard alone, maybe. But something else. The word cupboard landed in the room with its full weight. Dumbledore's eyes moved to the window and briefly away. I knew the Dursleys were not ideal, he said, quietly. They were not ideal, Harry agreed, in the same quiet tone, without letting it become an accusation and without letting it disappear into nothing. He held it the appropriate weight and moved on. What matters now is that we're both here and we want the same thing, roughly. Voldemort doesn't come back. The school is safe. The students are not used as instruments. He paused briefly on that last one. Dumbledore heard it. Harry, I'm not an instrument, Harry said, simply. I don't need to be. Whatever you had planned that involved me being less than I am, we should just take that off the table now. It'll save time. Another silence. Fawkes ruffled his feathers. A portrait near the window, a previous headmistress with sharp eyes and a Renaissance collar, was watching the conversation with undisguised fascination. "All right," Dumbledore said, at last. "Not agreement with everything. But something." A door opened a crack, light coming through. "Good," Harry said. He stood up. "The lemon drop was good, by the way." "Thank you, Harry." Dumbledore's voice caught him at the door. Harry turned. The old man was looking at him with an expression that had, for the first time since Harry had entered the room, let most of the performance down, just an old man behind his desk, enormously intelligent and genuinely, complexly tired. "For what it's worth," he said. "I am glad you are, what you are. Not what I planned for. What you actually are." Harry looked at him. The Soul Stone read the honesty of it and confirmed it. "Thank you," Harry said, and meant it. "So am I." He walked out and down the moving staircase, back into the castle proper, into the specific noise of Hogwarts at mid-morning, running feet somewhere above, an argument between portraits 2 corridors over, the smell of something being brewed in the direction of the dungeons. He found Ron and Hermione in the library. Ron was doing homework with the specific expression of someone who has left it to the last moment and is now in a committed relationship with suffering. Hermione was working through Volume 3 of the Corvus Compendium with annotations visible in 3 colors of ink. She looked up when Harry sat down. "How was it?" she said. "Productive," Harry said. What did he want? To understand what I am. And to figure out whether he could still run his plan. Hermione closed the compendium on her finger to hold the page. "Can he?" "Parts of it. The parts that don't involve using people as pieces." He pulled Ron's homework toward him, looked at it, pushed it back. "You've misidentified the core mechanism in question 4. "I know," Ron said. "I was hoping if I wrote confidently enough no one would notice." "Snape will notice." That was always the risk. Ron looked at him. "What plan? What are you talking about?" Harry looked at both of them, Ron, whose expression was the open face of someone who had decided to trust before he understood, and Hermione, whose expression was the sharper face of someone who was deciding the same thing but wanted to know the terms. He made a decision that he'd been building toward since the feast, since the train, since 2 weeks of watching these 2 people and finding them, repeatedly, worth it. "Voldemort is in the school," he said, quietly, "for them." Ron's quill stopped. Hermione's hand pressed the compendium flat. "He's possessing Quirrell," Harry continued. "He's after something Dumbledore has hidden in the 3rd-floor corridor. He'll make his move before the end of term, I think, before the school year gives him more resistance to navigate. And Dumbledore's plan involves letting him try." The library was quiet around them, the nearest students 4 tables away and occupied with their own problems. "How long have you known?" Hermione asked. "Since the feast. And you're telling us now because you're going to notice eventually anyway," Harry said, which was true and complimentary. "And because when it happens, it'll be better if you're not surprised." Ron looked at the table for a moment. "Then, are we safe? Here?" Harry looked at him with the direct, honest regard that was his default when it mattered. "As long as I'm here," he said, "yes." Ron nodded. That was enough for him, which was something Harry valued about Ron Weasley. His trust was not credulous, it was structural, given after assessment and then given completely, without the constant renegotiation of people who trusted with conditions. Hermione was looking at Harry with the expression she used for hard problems. "What are we going to do?" she said. "Right now. You're going to finish annotating Volume 3 and Ron's going to fix question 4. Harry picked up his own book. "We're going to be students at a school we've earned the right to be at. And when the time comes to do something else, we'll do that." He found his page. "But not before." Hermione looked at him for another moment. Then she opened the compendium again. "The annotation in the margin on page 247, she said, returning to her notes. "The Watcher dialect phrase, is it a locative or an instrumental case?" Instrumental, Harry said. The Watchers don't observe from a location. They observe by a method. That changes the sentence completely, she said. Yes. The published translation is wrong, then. The published translation is wrong, Harry confirmed. Thought so, she said, and crossed it out and wrote the correction in red. Ron looked between them with the specific expression of someone who has ended up at a table where the conversation is above his pay grade and has decided this is fine, actually. He fixed question 4. Harry read his book. Hermione annotated the compendium in 3 colors. 3 floors up, in the corridor they were not supposed to enter, the protections on the Philosopher's Stone held their positions with the patience of things that had been told to wait. And in the defense against the dark arts classroom, now empty, the late afternoon light fell across Quirrell's desk and the thing in his turban was very, very still, thinking thoughts that were old and cold and recalibrating around a new and inconvenient variable. Harry turned a page. The castle settled around its students, stone and history and light, and the first term of the year that was going to be several kinds of extraordinary carried on. Chapter 5, The Stone, the Mirror, the Truth. The snow came to Hogwarts in the 3rd week of November and stayed, settling into every architectural detail of the castle with the commitment of something that had been waiting for the right surface. The grounds went white and specific, the lake edged with ice that hadn't committed yet, the Ollery roof thick with it, the Quidditch pitch a flat bright expanse that Oliver would looked at every morning with the expression of a man doing weather-based grief. Harry stood at the window of the Gryffindor common room on a Sunday morning and watched it and drank his tea and thought about Quirrell. The thing in the turban had been quiet for 3 weeks in a way that was louder than noise. Harry tracked it the way you track weather that's building somewhere past the horizon, not through the soul stone's direct empathic sense, which required proximity, but through the pattern of small things. Quirrell arriving to meals slightly later than usual. Quirrell visiting the 3rd floor corridor twice in the past fortnight, both times between 2 and 4 in the morning, which Harry knew because the space stone gave him a low-level awareness of movement in enclosed spaces that had become background noise. Quirrell spending 20 minutes in the library with a book on mirror magic that he'd replaced on the wrong shelf, which Harry noticed because he knew where every relevant book in that library lived. Something was building toward something. "You've got that face," Ron said, appearing at the window with his own tea and a piece of toast he'd liberated from breakfast. He sat in the window seat opposite Harry and looked at him with the frank assessment that was one of Ron's most useful qualities. The one where you're doing 17 things in your head at once. "I'm thinking about Quirrell," Harry said. "Still. He's been to the corridor twice this month." Ron bit his toast. "So it's soon." "Soon," Harry agreed. "Right." Ron looked at the snow. "What do we do?" Harry looked at him. "You don't have to do anything." "This isn't your don't," Ron said, pleasantly but completely. "Don't do the thing where you're about to say it's not my problem. It's literally in the same building I'm sleeping in." He finished his toast. "What do we do?" Harry looked at him for a moment with the specific warmth of recognizing something that doesn't need acknowledgement to be real. "Hermione and I go to the corridor tonight," he said. "You watch the portrait hole. If anything changes, you let us know." Ron opened his mouth. "I need someone on the outside," Harry said. "That's not lesser. If Quirrell isn't the one who moves tonight, if whatever is coordinating this has another piece I haven't seen, I need someone out here who I trust." Ron considered this with the honesty he applied to everything. "Is that true or are you managing me?" "Both," Harry said, which was the honest answer. "The managing part is because I don't want you in the corridor. The true part is that I actually do need someone out here I trust." Ron held his gaze for 3 seconds. "Fine," he said. "But you tell me everything after." "Everything," Harry said. Hermione took the news in the library, where she was now working through Volume 5 of the Corvith Compendium and had developed the specific 1,000-yard focus of someone who has been reading continuously for 3 hours and needs only minimal stimulus to keep going. Harry sat across from her, told her the situation in 2 minutes, and watched her process it. "Tonight," she said. Tonight feels right, Harry said. The pattern suggests he's ready. And he touched his chest briefly, the time stone habit, a weight to today. Like a particular probability has become dominant. Hermione knew what that meant by now. She'd been learning the vocabulary of the stones over 2 months of daily conversation, and she'd done it the Hermione way, rigorously, with notes, asking precise questions and accepting nothing approximate. The time stone is showing you a convergence point, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, what's in the corridor? You said Dumbledore has something hidden there, but you never said what. The Philosopher's Stone, Harry said. Her eyes went bright with the involuntary recognition of someone who has read about something and is encountering it as real. Nicholas Flamel's, yes. Which produces the elixir of life, which Voldemort needs to reconstitute himself, yes. She sat with this for a moment, organizing. The protections in the corridor. What are they? Multiple layers. Fluffy first, three-headed dog, Hagrid's, keyed to music. Then Devil's Snare. Then Enchanted Keys. Then a life-sized chess set. Then a troll. Then Snape's logic puzzle with potions. She looked at him. You've been in there. Last week, Harry said. Reconnaissance. I wanted to know the terrain. And? The chess set is the most interesting piece. The rest are manageable. She looked at her notes for a moment. The logic puzzle. Snape's contribution. 7 bottles. Standard Snape precision, it's actually a good puzzle. The kind that rewards clear thinking and eliminates guessing. Obviously I'm solving that one, she said, as a matter of basic fact. Obviously, Harry agreed. She closed the compendium and began stacking her notes with the specific efficiency of someone shifting from study mode to operational mode. It was, Harry thought, one of the most reassuring things he'd ever watched a person do. They went after midnight. Ron was at the portrait hole with his chess set. He'd brought it because, he explained, he might as well do something useful while he waited, and he'd spent the last 2 months playing against Harry and against Hermione and against a self-playing program that Harry had helped him set up using the Reality Stone in a way that Ron found both useful and deeply unfair. He was, Harry thought, going to be a remarkable chess player by the end of the year. Be careful, Ron said, as they stepped through the portrait. Always, Harry said. That's not reassuring, Ron said. You being careful is different from normal people being careful. I'll be back before 4, Harry said, which was more concrete and was what Ron actually needed. The castle at night was a different entity from the castle during the day, not hostile, just more itself, the centuries of it more present without the insulation of student noise. Harry and Hermione moved through it without difficulty, Harry's space stone awareness of every occupied room making navigation trivially simple, Hermione's footsteps careful and deliberate in the way of someone who had learned to trust Harry's navigation and put her own attention on other things. The 3rd floor corridor. The door. Harry looked at it for a moment. Ready? Yes, Hermione said, in the tone that meant she had reviewed every relevant fact and was prepared for the range of possible outcomes. Harry opened the door. Fluffy was there, all 3 heads, all 3 sets of eyes, all 3 expressions of a creature that had been bred for threat and had found its assignment satisfying. It registered them with the immediate attention of something that had been waiting for exactly this intrusion and had opinions about it. 3 heads, 3 growls that built into something wall vibrating in total. Hermione had her wand out. Harry raised his hand slightly, not a wand, just a hand, the way you raise it to stop a door swinging, and the Mind Stone did something extremely gentle to Fluffy's 3 sets of neural pathways simultaneously. Not pain, not suppression. Just rest. The kind of rest that comes naturally and feels deserved. All 3 heads went down in sequence. Fluffy snored. 3 enormous snores, slightly out of sync, that filled the corridor with a sound like distant machinery. Hermione looked at Harry. Then at the dog. Then at Harry. The Mind Stone, she said. Yes. Can it do that to any creature? Depends on the neurological complexity, Harry said. And on whether the creature has defenses. Fluffy doesn't. Remarkable, she said, in the tone she used for things that were genuinely remarkable. The trapdoor in the floor. Harry dropped through it first, not because he needed to be first but because if there was something waiting, better to have him receive it, and landed in the devil's snare, which immediately and enthusiastically began doing what devil's snare does. It lasted approximately 4 seconds. The reality stone adjusted the plant's perception of Harry at the cellular level, gently suggesting to every tendril that he was the specific kind of object that was not food, and the devil's snare, operating on nothing but instinct and hunger, released him without distress. Hermione landed beside him. The snare moved toward her and Harry's hand moved at the same time. She raised her wand and sent a bright light that made the plant recoil with organic unhappiness. She landed clean. I had that, she said. I know, Harry said. You just wanted to help, she said, which was the accurate version. Yes. It's fine, she said. Let's go. The key chamber was loud, hundreds of winged keys circling in the high dark space, the correct one somewhere in the motion, and 2 brooms on the floor that were obviously the intended method. Harry looked at the keys for 6 seconds, the space stone giving him every position simultaneously, every velocity, every trajectory. He reached up without a broom, because the space stone made the broom optional when you needed to move precisely in a defined space, and took the key from the air with the same motion he used to catch the snitch. Hermione, on the broom she'd mounted with considerably more grace than the exercise required, looked down at him from 2 feet off the ground. You didn't need the broom. No, Harry said. You let me get on the broom anyway. You looked like you wanted to, Harry said. She descended, returned the broom, and looked at him with an expression that was not quite exasperated and not quite fond and was something that lived between them. Try to let me do things sometimes, she said. The puzzle is yours, Harry said. Entirely yours. I won't touch it. She seemed satisfied with this. The chest chamber stopped them both at the threshold. It was the right size to stop people. The chess pieces were life-sized and made of black stone and white stone respectively, and they stood in their positions with the particular gravity of something that has been designed to be taken seriously and has succeeded. The board was the chamber floor. There was no way around it. Hermione looked at the board with the rapid, systematic scan of someone reading multiple things at once: positions, piece distribution, the white side's current arrangement, the gaps that suggested previous engagement. Then she went still with the specific stillness of someone who has arrived at an answer and is checking it. White to move, she said, half to herself. They're set for a specific endgame scenario. She walked along the edge of the board, looking at angles. We need to take 3 specific pieces to clear a path. But, she stopped. Looked at Harry. One of us has to play as a piece to do it. I know, Harry said. The piece that completes the sequence is the knight, she said. On the queen's side. The move sequence puts the knight in check from the bishop. She paused. Whoever plays as the knight takes the hit. I'll play the knight, Harry said. She opened her mouth. Hermione, he said, gently. I'm fine. I'm telling you that as a fact, not to reassure you. He looked at the board. If the bishop takes the knight position, when it does, it won't put me down. I need you to trust that and get through to the potion chamber while the pieces are still reacting. She looked at him for a long moment with those very precise brown eyes that the soul stone showed as running the full calculation, his capabilities, the risk assessment, the probability branches, the specific emotional weight of watching someone she'd decided to care about take a hit she could see coming. She was doing it honestly and thoroughly and arriving, correctly, at the conclusion that he was right. I don't like it, she said. I know. But you're right. I know that too. That's irritating, she said, and picked her piece. The game played out in 11 moves. Hermione directed the white pieces with the authority of someone who had been doing chess problems since she was 7 and found them satisfying precisely because they had clean solutions. Harry moved as the knight, the white knight, which had a quality that was slightly appropriate and slightly absurd, across the board in the angular patterns of the piece, feeling the game's logic work through the space stone's positional awareness. On the 9th move, the sequence closed. Harry moved the knight to the required square. The black bishop moved. The impact was the specific force of enchanted stone moving with full mechanical intent, and it hit Harry from the side with a sound like a crack across the chamber. He went sideways and down, and the chess piece's strike was significant. Designed to put an adult wizard out of the fight, it delivered everything it had. Harry hit the stone floor and held still for 3 seconds. He did an inventory: ribs, fine, impact distributed by the power stone absorbing the kinetic energy without being asked, the way a reflex works. Shoulder, fine. Head, fine. He stood up. The chess pieces froze. Hermione, who had been moving immediately when the strike happened, had her hands over her mouth. Her eyes were very bright in the way of someone who had known intellectually that this would be fine and found that knowing and watching were different. "I'm fine," Harry said, brushing stone dust off his shoulder. "Go. Quickly, before they reset." She moved. She looked at him once more at the edge of the board, a look that was short and said several things, none of which required words. And then she went. Harry followed. The troll chamber smelled of what trolls had been in the area recently and were nearby, and the troll itself was standing in the middle of the chamber with the expression of a creature that had been given a job it was happy about. It was mountain troll-sized, which was significant, and it raised its club when Harry entered and brought it down with the full force and complete lack of architectural concern that characterized troll combat. Harry sidestepped. He looked at the troll with the combined attention of Mintal's combat training and 7 years of reading opponents, and what he saw was simple: it was strong, it was slow, and it was entirely committed to the current swing. He stepped inside the next strike's arc, inside being the one place you don't get hit by something with a wide swing, and put one hand on the troll's wrist at the peak of its reach. He didn't crush it. He didn't throw the troll through a wall. Minimum necessary. He applied the specific joint pressure that Mintal had shown him, the point where anatomy overrides determination, and the troll sat down with the expression of something that had expected a very different outcome and was reassessing. It stayed sitting. Harry and Hermione went through the door on the other side. The potion chamber was purple and black flame and 7 bottles and a rolled piece of parchment, and it was exactly as described, and Hermione picked up the parchment and read it with the focused efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this without knowing the specific form it would take. Harry watched her work. The soul stone showed him what was ahead, not the specific details, just the quality of what was waiting through the black flame door, the presence that had been tracking him since September, now close, now aware. Hermione solved the puzzle in 4 minutes. She held up the correct bottle with the certainty of someone who has gone through every step twice and found the same answer both times. "This one," she said. "You're sure?" "I'm always sure when I'm sure," she said, which was the most accurate sentence about Hermione Granger that had ever been spoken. She paused. "The smallest bottle. There's enough for one person." "I'm going through," Harry said. "I know." She looked at the bottle. "You shouldn't need it, should you?" "The fire." "The power stone would handle the fire," Harry said. "But I'll take the potion anyway." "He's watching that door." "I'd rather he not know exactly what I am before I'm in the room." She held the bottle for a moment. Then she held it out and he took it, and her hand stayed near his for a half-second longer than the handoff required, which was something she wouldn't have done 3 months ago and which meant something about how 3 months of daily proximity to each other had reshaped the default distances between them. She stepped back. "I'll go back for Ron," she said. And then, she looked at the door. "You'll come back?" "Yes," Harry said. "I'm not asking," she said. "I'm stating." "Yes," Harry said, with the specific quality of meaning it completely. He drank the potion, which tasted of something cold and clean like mountain water, and stepped through the black fire. The chamber beyond was long and vaulted and lit with the quality of something that had been waiting, the mirror of Erist standing at the far end, enormous and ornate, its surface showing Harry, as he crossed the chamber, what he had expected it to show. The reflection was layered, the family he'd never had, yes, but also the full integrated version of himself, the stones and the human, complete in a way that was moving without being painful. He was whole. He'd been whole since 4 years old, and a corner that folded and a purple hand held out in a cupboard. The mirror confirmed rather than revealed. Quirrell stood before the mirror, his back to the door, his shoulders rigid. "I knew you'd come," Quirrell said, and the stammer was gone. Without the stammer, his voice was precise and slightly tired, the voice of a man who has been performing someone else's theater for a long time. "Professor," Harry said. Quirrell turned. His face in the chamber's light was something to look at, the face of a man in the specific anguish of someone who has made a sequence of choices that have led somewhere he did not fully intend to go, and who no longer has access to the early choices where the direction might have changed. The soul stone showed him with complete accuracy, the genuine intelligence, the ambition that had started as hunger for knowledge and had been weaponized, the fear that lived under everything like permanent groundwater, and underneath the fear, very small and very old, the original person who had simply wanted to understand how things worked. "You see it in the mirror," Quirrell said. His eyes had moved to Harry's face and were doing the same assessment they'd been doing since September, trying to understand what they were looking at. "How long have you known?" "The feast," Harry said. Quirrell's jaw tightened. He said you were a child. That you'd be manageable?" Harry said. "Easy," Quirrell said, with the specific bitterness of someone who has staked a great deal on someone else's assessment and found it wanting. "Tell me what you were promised," Harry said. Quirrell blinked. He had clearly prepared for threats, for magic, for confrontation, and what he'd been given was a question delivered with what sounded startlingly like genuine interest. "What? What did he offer you? For all this?" Harry gestured around the chamber. "For what you've been carrying." Quirrell looked at him for a moment. The soul stone showed Harry the surprise working through him, not comfortable, but real, the specific surprise of being asked about yourself rather than what you've done. "Knowledge," Quirrell said finally. "He knows things. Dark arts that aren't in any, there are theories, systems of magic that predate the classification into dark and light, that he has access to and," he stopped. "You don't care about that." "I actually do," Harry said. "But that's not the point right now." He looked at Quirrell with the honest, direct attention he'd learned from Thanos, not warm exactly, but real, the full weight of his consideration. "You're not happy with this arrangement." Quirrell said nothing. "You've been carrying something that is using you," Harry said. "You know that. You've known for a long time. The fear I'm feeling from you isn't of me. It's of him. Specifically. That's very different from what you'd feel if this were a situation you had real agency in." Quirrell's expression shifted in the small visible ways of someone trying to maintain a position that something true has gotten underneath. His hands, Harry noticed, were shaking slightly. "It's too late," Quirrell said. "For whatever you're suggesting." "What am I suggesting?" That there's a way out." "Is there?" Harry said. A pause that had real weight in it. "Enough of this," said a voice that didn't come from Quirrell's mouth. It came from the turban, and it was cold and layered and old, and it had the quality of something that had been listening to the entire exchange with increasing interest and decreasing patience. "Turn around, Professor." Quirrell turned around. His hands came up and unwound the turban with the automatic motion of someone who has done this before and doesn't enjoy it. The turban fell, and the back of Quirrell's head was a face, and the face was Voldemort, and Harry looked at it with the full attention of someone who has been told about a thing and is now seeing the thing. He was less and more than the visions had suggested, simultaneously. Less physical, the face pale and stretched, the eyes red-rimmed and narrowed, wearing Quirrell's skull the way you wear a borrowed coat that doesn't fit, every line of him expressing the specific degradation of something that had been a person and had chosen not to be. More present, the intelligence was intact, the power that had been called the greatest in a century was intact, compressed into parasitic existence and furious about it. Voldemort looked at Harry. Harry looked back. "So," Voldemort said. "The boy who lived. Let me see the boy who lived." "You're looking at him," Harry said. "I am," Voldemort said, and there was a specific note in it that the Soul Stone caught, not what Harry had expected. Not dismissal. Not contempt, or at least not only contempt. Assessment. Real assessment, the kind that only beings of genuine intelligence perform. He was looking at Harry's eyes, the same way Ollivander had, the same way Dumbledore had. "The eyes," he said, almost to himself. "What have you done to the eyes, boy?" "I haven't done anything," Harry said. "The stones did. The Infinity Stones." A pause that was doing complicated work. "They've been in you since, how long?" "Since I was 4, Harry said. "And Thanos?" "You've been with Thanos." Something moved in the red eyes that was recognizable as recalculation. "You're not what Dumbledore told the world you were." "No," Harry said. "You're not what I thought you were either," Voldemort said. "This changes the calculation considerably." "I expect it does," Harry said. "Here's what's going to happen tonight. You're not getting the stone. I'm going to take it, and it's going to go somewhere you can't reach it, and that particular path back to a body is going to close. I'm telling you this directly because I think you deserve to know what's happening rather than have it done to you without explanation." Voldemort was quiet for a moment. The red eyes studied him with the specific attention of something that had not, in a very long time, been spoken to like this, directly, without fear, with the specific courtesy of someone who finds the conversation interesting rather than threatening. "You're not afraid of me," Voldemort observed. "No," Harry said. "Most are." "I know." Harry looked at the face for a moment. "I want to ask you something." "Ask." "Was it worth it? The choices that brought you here, the Horcruxes, the body you gave up, the people you killed, the things you broke," Harry looked at the red eyes, "was any of it worth what you actually got?" The chamber was very still. Quirrell's hands were at his sides and he wasn't moving, and Harry had the sense, through the Soul Stone, that Quirrell was listening to this question with every part of himself. "An interesting question," Voldemort said slowly, "from someone who cannot die." "I can die," Harry said. "I choose not to, right now." "That's different." A pause. Something moved in the voice that was not anger. "You are either very brave or very certain." "Both," Harry said. "They're not the same thing." "No," Voldemort said. "They're not." Another pause, longer. "The stone, then." "The stone," Harry agreed. He turned to the mirror. He looked at it, not at his reflection, at the mirror itself, at the object and its enchantment, the specific magic Dumbledore had woven into it that hid the stone from anyone who wanted to use it rather than find it. The reality stone stirred in him with the particular pleasure it took in undoing elegant enchantments, the way a locksmith takes pleasure in a complex lock. The stone appeared in his hand. It was small and red and warm and radiated the specific energy of something that had been charged with centuries of Flamel's attention and intention. Harry held it for a moment. He could feel its properties, the elixir potential, the transmutation capacity, the essentially human desire for permanence that had created it. He held it with appropriate respect. Then he did something that hadn't been done with the Philosopher's Stone in its entire existence. He unmade it. Not violently. Not with destruction. He used the reality stone to disassemble it at the fundamental level, to return its matter to base constituents and its energy to the field, gently, completely, the way you release a held breath. The red light in his hand faded. The warmth faded. The stone ceased to exist. Flamel would feel it, somewhere in France, and would have a few months, perhaps longer than history had suggested, because Harry had, in the disassembly, repurposed a fraction of the stone's energy toward extending the existing elixir's efficacy. It wasn't permanent. But it was more time, and time was not nothing. Behind him, Voldemort was silent for a long moment. "Interesting choice," he said finally. "It removes the variable," Harry said. "It does." A pause. "I will find another way." "I know," Harry said. "I expect you will. You're persistent, which I actually respect. But the paths I can see," the time stone hummed briefly, "are getting narrower. This was the widest one." "You're telling me this?" "Yes." "Why?" Harry turned back to look at the red eyes in the back of Quirrell's skull. "Because I think you're intelligent enough to understand what I am and what that means for your long-term probability. And because," he looked at Quirrell. "Because the man carrying you deserves a choice." Voldemort's gaze moved from Harry to Quirrell and back. The red eyes were doing something complex. "What choice does he have?" Voldemort said, and the voice had shifted register slightly, harder, the recalculation closing down rather than opening. "Let him go," Harry said. "Tonight. Leave voluntarily. I won't pursue you. Not tonight. And if I don't? Then I remove you," Harry said simply. "Not kill you, you're not fully alive in the conventional sense right now, which limits the options. I separate you from him and contain what's left, and the choice about what comes next gets made for you rather than by you." The chamber was quiet. The soul stone showed Harry Quirrell's interior in the silence, the terrified, exhausted, genuine hope of a man who had spent a year as a host and had been waiting, without articulating it even to himself, for precisely this, someone to make the offer, someone with the power to enforce it. "You'd let me go," Voldemort said. "Knowing I'll come back." "Yes. That's tactically unsound." "Maybe," Harry said. "But you leaving Quirrell alive and intact tonight matters more to me than closing a loop that has other closings available." He held the red gaze. "I told you I'd tell you what was happening. This is what's happening. You have 30 seconds. The 30 seconds passed in a silence that had texture to it. Then Voldemort left. He left the way smoke leaves, not dramatically, not with a thunderclap, but with the specific reluctance of something that has assessed its options and found them limited. A dark vapor, slow and cold, rising from the back of Quirrell's skull, moving toward the chamber's single vent high in the wall, and then through it, and then gone. The cold went with it. Quirrell collapsed. Harry was there before he hit the ground, the space stone closing the distance instantly, catching him and lowering him to the stone floor with the care you give something that has been through a year of damage. Quirrell's breathing was bad, shallow, rapid, the body making immediate announcements about what parasitic habitation had cost it. His face, without the presence in it, was just a man's face, and the man was very young, Harry realized, younger than he'd seemed with the turban and the performance, late 20s, the face of someone who had made the worst decision of his life before his life had really started. "You're free," Harry said to him. Quirrell's eyes opened. They were brown and very clear. "Am I?" he said, and it was not a question but an accounting, the specific voice of someone checking whether something true could possibly be true. "Yes," Harry said. "The stone, gone," Harry said. "He can't use it." Quirrell closed his eyes for a long moment. Then opened them again and looked at Harry with the expression of someone doing the math on an outcome they hadn't planned for surviving. "What happens to me now?" "That depends on you and the Wisengamot," Harry said honestly. "I won't pretend otherwise. You've spent a year letting Voldemort use you to try to steal something that would have brought him back. That has consequences in the world." "I know," Quirrell said, without protest, which was the specific response of someone who had been waiting to be accountable for a long time and found the waiting worse than the accounting. "But you're alive," Harry said. "And you're yourself. Tonight. That's where you start." He looked at Quirrell steadily. "I'll tell Dumbledore what happened. What you did and what you didn't do. That matters too. Quirrell looked at him for a long moment with the particular attention of someone who is seeing something they can't categorize. How old are you? He asked. 11, Harry said. Quirrell's face did something that was almost a laugh and wasn't quite but was the shape of one. Right, he said. Of course. Harry helped him up and they went back through the chambers, the potion and the chess board and the troll, who had moved to the corner and was sitting with its club across its knees and regarded them as they passed without moving, and the flying keys, and the devil's snare, and Fluffy, who was still asleep and snoring with the committed unconsciousness of something that had been given rest and found it good. In the third-floor corridor, with the door closed behind them, Quirrell sat against the wall and Harry stood opposite and they looked at each other in the midnight torchlight of Hogwarts. He'll come back, Quirrell said. You know that. Yes, Harry said. And you'll be here. Yes, Harry said. Quirrell nodded slowly, with the acceptance of someone who has seen the full shape of the situation and found it, if not comforting, at least coherent. The students, he said. Tonight. Were any of them safe? Harry said. All of them. Always. Quirrell looked at the torchlight on the opposite wall. I was a good teacher, he said, very quietly. Before. I was good at it. I know, Harry said, because the Soul Stone had shown him this from the first lesson, the genuine quality that lived underneath the performance. Might have been something, Quirrell said. Might still be, Harry said, and meant it, and Quirrell looked at him with the specific expression of someone being given a possibility they'd stopped believing in. They waited together for Dumbledore, who arrived 20 minutes later with McGonagall, both of them with wands out and cloaks over nightclothes, and who stopped at the sight of them sitting peacefully in the corridor with the third-floor door closed behind them. Dumbledore looked at Harry. His eyes moved over him with the rapid, comprehensive assessment of someone checking for damage, and then, when none was found, shifting to the question of what had happened. The stone? Dumbledore said. Gone, Harry said. Unmade. He can't use it. And, Dumbledore's eyes moved to Quirrell. He needs the hospital wing, Harry said. He's been through a year of habitation. His body needs assessment. He paused. He needs a fair hearing too. Not tonight. But eventually. Dumbledore looked at Quirrell with the complicated regard of someone absorbing an outcome that had several layers. McGonagall was already at Quirrell's side, professional and efficient, her assessment hand on his pulse. Voldemort? Dumbledore said. Gone. Not destroyed, I offered him the chance to leave voluntarily and he took it. He's out in the world somewhere, reduced, no body, no stone. Harry met Dumbledore's eyes. The Horcruxes are still the issue. That's the remaining architecture. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, complex moment. You know about the Horcruxes. I know about the Horcruxes, Harry said. And you intend to handle them, Harry said. In the right order, in the right way. Not tonight. This year has enough. He stood up, brushing stone dust from his second time tonight falling onto castle floors, and looked at the headmaster with the direct, level regard that had been disconcerting people since September. Quirrell made a choice and then he couldn't get out of it. That's a story worth examining before it's a crime. He looked at McGonagall. His prognosis? Stable, McGonagall said, with the slightly arrested expression of someone answering a question posed with the authority of a medical consultant. Weakened. He needs rest and monitoring. Good. Harry looked once more at Quirrell, who was watching him with the exhausted clarity of someone who had arrived, unexpectedly, at shore. I'll write my account tonight and have it to you by morning, Harry told Dumbledore. Harry, good night, Professor, Harry said, pleasantly, and walked back down the corridor toward Gryffindor Tower. He could feel Dumbledore watching him go with the specific quality of someone watching a plan they'd held for a decade fold into something entirely new, and the Soul Stone showed him the honest truth of what was in it, not resentment, not defeat. Something considerably more genuine and considerably more surprised. Respect. Real and fully formed and recently arrived. Harry took the stairs two at a time and felt the castle around him, the sleeping weight of it, the history, the students in their beds, the portraits dozing in their frames. He felt it the way the stones let him feel everything, not as data, not as abstraction, but as real weight, real presence, real. Ron was at the portrait hole, awake, with his chest set and the particular expression of someone who has been waiting for hours on pure willpower. He stood up when Harry came through. "You're fine," Ron said, taking inventory. "I'm fine," Harry said. "What happened?" "The stone's gone. Quirrell's free. Voldemort's out in the world somewhere, reduced, no immediate threat." Harry sat down in the nearest armchair. "I'll tell you everything in the morning. And Hermione too. Together." "She's asleep," Ron said. "I know. Morning is fine." Harry looked at the fire, which was down to coals. "Thank you for waiting." Ron looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone deciding whether to say the thing. He said the thing. "You were going to be fine the whole time, weren't you?" "Yes," Harry said honestly. "Right." Ron sat back down at his chessboard and looked at the position he'd left. "Then why did I spend 3 hours absolutely convinced you might not be?" Harry smiled at the fire. "Because you care," he said. "And caring means it's never fully certain." Ron considered this. Moved a piece. "That's a bit philosophical for 3 in the morning." "Go to sleep, Ron." "Yeah," Ron said, and gathered his chess set. He stopped at the dormitory stairs. "Harry." "Yeah." "Good. Tonight. Whatever you did, good." "Thanks," Harry said. Ron went upstairs. Harry sat with the coals for a while, in no hurry to sleep, watching the last of the fire and feeling the stones in him settle into their night rhythm, the way a house settles after the people in it go quiet. He thought about Quirrell saying might have been something. He thought about Voldemort's red eyes doing real assessment for the first time in what had clearly been a long time. He thought about Dumbledore's expression as he'd walked away. He thought about a cupboard that was 37 inches wide. He thought about a corner that had folded. He was 11 years old and sitting in the common room of a school that was his, in a world that was his, with 2 friends asleep upstairs and a guardian somewhere in the cosmos who would come if called, and a universe inside him that had decided, at 4 years old in the dark, that he was worth choosing. The coals went from orange to red to the quiet dark. Harry went to bed. Chapter 6. The God declares the morning after the 3rd-floor corridor was a Tuesday, which felt insufficient. Harry came down to breakfast before most of the tower was awake, dressed and unhurried, and found the great hall in its early morning state, sparse, quiet, the enchanted ceiling showing the grey-white of a December sky that hadn't decided yet what to do with the day. A handful of 7th-years were at the Ravenclaw table with books open and the focused desperation of people whose exams were next week. 2 Hufflepuff girls were sharing toast at the far end of their table and talking about something that made them laugh in the soft way of people who have been friends long enough to find the same things funny. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table and ate eggs and thought. The Owls arrived at 7:15, as they always did, dropping letters and packages with the organized chaos of a delivery system that worked entirely on instinct. Most of the mail was ordinary, family letters, magazines, the odd package of home-baked something that was identifiable by the smell. Harry had one letter, addressed in his own handwriting from a week ago, which was the Time Stone's way of noting that certain communications needed to happen in a specific sequence. He'd learned not to question the logistics of temporal correspondence. He had 3 letters, actually. One from himself. One with the Hogwarts seal on unfamiliar parchment that turned out to be from Dumbledore, brief, requesting a meeting at his convenience. And a third with no seal and no return address, written on material that wasn't quite parchment, something tougher, with a faint iridescent quality to it that Harry recognized as a specific Shi'ar composite. He opened that one first. "Heard a rumor," it said, in the particular shorthand that had developed between him and Nebula over 4 years of infrequent but substantive correspondence, that something interesting happened on your small planet. Confirm or deny. Also, you still owe me a rematch on the form work. Your left side drops when you're anticipating. N. Harry smiled at his eggs and wrote back, confirmed. Also, my left side is fine. H. He tied it to the school owl that had delivered it, which had the expression of something that had been given unusual instructions and had followed them and wanted acknowledgement. Ron came down at 7:40 with the specific expression of someone who had not slept enough and had opinions about it. He sat across from Harry, loaded his plate with the commitment of someone fueling for a day he wasn't sure about, and looked at Harry. Still fine, he said. Still fine, Harry said. Right. Ron ate. Then, the thing with Quirrell. Is it done? The immediate thing, Harry said. The longer thing is still moving. Voldemort's out there in some reduced form. The Horcruxes exist. Right, you mentioned those. What are they? Objects he's used to split and hide pieces of his soul. They're what make him effectively immortal. You can kill the body but the soul fragment anchors him to existence. There are several of them. Ron had stopped eating. Several. Several, Harry confirmed. And you have to destroy them. Yes. Not this year. The immediate threat is neutralized and the stone is gone. This year we're students. He met Ron's eyes. That's a real thing, Ron. Not a cover. Not a performance. We're actually here, at this school, and that matters. Ron looked at him for a moment and then visibly chose to believe this, which was the thing Harry valued most about him. When Ron chose to trust something, he chose it with his whole weight, no reservations held back. Right, he said, and resumed eating. Good. Hermione arrived at 7:50 with her bag already organized for the day and her hair having declared war on Tuesday morning, which it was losing only marginally. She sat beside Harry, looked at his face with the rapid assessment she developed for reading him, and said, "Tell me." Harry told her, in full, the way he'd promised. He went through it methodically, the chambers, Quirrell, Voldemort's departure, the stone being unmade. He didn't editorialize. He let her form her own responses. She let him finish completely before speaking, which was one of her qualities he appreciated most. You unmade it, she said. Yes. The Philosopher's Stone. You unmade it. The Reality Stone reversed its fundamental. I understand the mechanism, she said, with the slight edge of someone who has read 7 volumes of Corvus and does not need the basic explanation. I meant, you chose to unmake it rather than hide it or return it, or, it removes the variable, Harry said, which was what he told Voldemort. It also means Flammel, has more time than you'd think, Harry said. I redirected a fraction of the stone's energy when I disassembled it. Not permanent. But enough. He looked at her. I thought about it. He's lived 600 years. The stone was a crutch at this point, the philosophy behind it was about refusing to let go. That's not my judgment to make about his life. He paused. But removing the thing Voldemort needed was my call, and I made it. Hermione was quiet, processing. Ron was watching her process, because Ron was very good at reading Hermione's processing and knowing when to stay out of it. After a moment she said, the Horcruxes. Yes. How many? 7 originally. 6 objects, 1 unintentional. The diary is already in circulation, Lucius Malfoy has it. Harry kept his voice level. I'll deal with that in the right time. The ring, the locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake. He paused briefly. And one more that needs a different kind of handling. Hermione's eyes were very precise. The unintentional one. Yes, Harry said. She held his gaze and he could see her reaching the implication and the specific quality with which she arrived at it, not with horror, but with the exact focused attention of someone who has received difficult information and is already thinking about what it means. "You," she said quietly. "There's a fragment of Voldemort's soul in my scar," Harry said. "Has been since the night he killed my parents and the curse rebounded. He made a seventh Horcrux by accident. He said it the way you say a fact about the physical world: gravity pulls things down, light travels at a constant speed. Voldemort's soul has been in my head since I was 1 year old. The Soul Stone has been very useful in terms of understanding the mechanics. The fragment is contained, it's not influencing me, hasn't been since the stones integrated. The Soul Stone established a kind of partition. Clear separation." Ron was very still. Not with fear, with the quality of someone absorbing something significant and not performing his response. "That's why the curse didn't kill you," he said finally. "Part of why," Harry said. "The sacrifice protection my mother created was the primary factor. But yes, the fragment of Voldemort's soul that entered me is also why the killing curse failed to kill the soul it hit. It hit something it recognized as itself." "Can it be removed?" Hermione asked. She was already 3 steps ahead in her thinking, Harry could tell. "Yes," Harry said. "The Soul Stone can extract it cleanly. I've already mapped the procedure. It's not urgent, it's contained, it's isolated, it presents no risk to me or anyone else. But it's on the list." "How are you so calm about this?" Ron said. Harry looked at him honestly. "I've known for 2 years," he said. "I had time to get to calm before I had to talk about it." He looked between them. "It doesn't frighten me. It's a problem with a solution. Those are the best kind." Ron looked at the ceiling with the expression of a person who has decided that Harry Potter's relationship with terrifying information was simply a category of its own and he was choosing to accept it. "Right," he said. "Right. Okay. Okay," Harry agreed. They ate breakfast in the way of people who have had a significant conversation and are now allowing the ordinary morning to come back around them, which was a skill all 3 of them had developed by different routes and which served the same function. The world doesn't pause for significance, so you learn to carry significance and keep going. Dumbledore's office at 10, between Transfiguration and lunch. Harry went up the gargoyle stairs and knocked and was called in to find the headmaster at his desk with the careful composure of someone who had been thinking since 3 in the morning and had arrived at a position. He looked different from the meeting in October, not diminished, but rearranged, the way a room looks different when furniture has been moved rather than removed. Still entirely himself. But the self had a different center of gravity. "Sit down, Harry," he said, and the warmth was real this time. Less instrument and more, just warmth. Harry sat. No lemon drop appeared, which was interesting. "I read your account," Dumbledore said. "All right," Harry said. "You were thorough. Accurate. The sequence of events matches what Professor Quirrell has told Madame Pomfrey from his bed in the hospital wing." Dumbledore looked at him over his half-moon spectacles. "He's recovering. Slowly, but genuinely." "Good," Harry said. "He asked me to tell you," Dumbledore paused, finding the right words, "that he intends to mean it." "What he said to you? About still being something?" He held Harry's gaze. "I thought you should know." Harry sat with that for a moment. "Thank you," he said. Dumbledore folded his hands. "I owe you several things," he said, with the specific directness of someone who had rehearsed being honest and was now doing it. "An apology, first. For the Dursleys." He said it plainly, without the soft architecture of deflection. "I knew they were not good guardians. I told myself the blood protection justified the placement. It was not a fully honest accounting." Harry looked at him. The Soul Stone showed him the real weight in it, the genuine regret, aging and present, the kind that has been examined and found wanting in the way of things you can't take back but can at least stop defending. He didn't rush to absolve it. He let it stand the way difficult things deserve to stand. "I appreciate that," Harry said. The second thing I owe you, Dumbledore continued, is honesty about what I intended for you. In the long term. He was looking at Harry with the eyes of someone choosing transparency, which is different from the eyes of someone who has decided transparency is strategic. I had plans. That required you to be a certain kind of person. Less, he searched for the word, integrated than you are. I believe some of those plans required you to be expendable. In the end. The room was very quiet. The silver instruments turned on their stands. Fawkes looked at Harry from his perch. The Horcrux, Harry said. Yes. Dumbledore's voice was steady and the steadiness cost something. I had reason to believe, eventually, that the connection between you and Voldemort was more than, that there was something in you that would need to die. That you would need to walk into death willingly, at the right moment, for him to be truly destroyed. And you intended to tell me this at some point, Harry said. At the right point, Dumbledore said. Which I had defined, in my own thinking, as late. Very late. He held Harry's gaze. Late enough that you could not choose differently. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. Harry looked at the headmaster with the full attention of the Soul Stone and all 5 of the others and the specific perception of someone who has had 7 years of reading beings who have more power than honesty in their history and has learned to value the moments when they choose the harder thing. I know, Harry said. I've known that was the shape of your plan since October. Dumbledore's expression moved. And you said nothing. I was waiting to see if you'd tell me yourself. A pause that was long and substantive. And if I hadn't? Then I'd have told you what I'm telling you now, Harry said. That the plan doesn't work on me. Not because I'm unwilling to sacrifice myself if the situation genuinely required it, but because it doesn't require it. The Soul Stone can extract the fragment cleanly. I've already mapped the procedure. The death solution was a workaround for a problem that has a better answer. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. You didn't know that because you didn't have the Soul Stone. I'm not angry at you for not knowing. I'm telling you now so we can work from what's actually true. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The window light put grey and gold across his robes, the December sun doing what it could. You are the most extraordinary person I have ever met, Dumbledore said, quietly and completely. And I have met a very great many people over a very great many years. I've met more, Harry said, without vanity, as simple fact. Dumbledore's eyes did something that was unmistakably a smile. I expect you have. He was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? Going forward. Honesty, Harry said. That's the main thing. If you know something relevant to the Horcrux problem, or to Voldemort's return, or to the people in this school who are in danger, tell me. I don't need to be managed. I need information. And in exchange, I'll tell you what I see, Harry said. What the Time Stone shows me that's relevant to Hogwarts and the people here. I won't tell you everything, some of what I see is private to specific people and that's not mine to share. But what's relevant to the larger situation, yes. Dumbledore considered this. It was the consideration of a man who had operated for decades on the philosophy that information was power and power was best held centrally, and who was being asked to operate differently. It wasn't easy. Harry watched him do the honest work of it. Agreed, Dumbledore said. Harry nodded. The diary, he said. It's the first one that needs handling. It's already in circulation and it's the most immediately dangerous because it's designed to possess the user. I'll need to know when and how it surfaces. You believe it's already placed? Lucius Malfoy has it, Harry said. I believe he intends to use it next year. Dumbledore's expression shifted by a degree. You know this from the Time Stone, Harry said. And Draco mentioned his father at Madame Malkin's in a way that suggested Lucius has something he's pleased about. He paused. Draco's not involved. He doesn't know. You're certain? I'm certain, Harry said. Dumbledore absorbed this. I'll look into it, he said, which in Dumbledore's language meant he would look into it thoroughly and precisely and with the comprehensive intelligence he applied to things he took seriously. Good. Harry stood. One more thing. Yes. Quirrell's trial, when it happens. I'll speak at it if asked. Harry looked at the headmaster. The extenuating circumstances were genuine. Being possessed isn't the same as choosing. He made the original bad choice, and he should account for that, but a man who spent a year as a vessel for Voldemort and is still here, still trying to be something, deserves an honest representation. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression he'd been wearing with increasing frequency since October, the one that was specific to encountering something that was better than what you'd planned for. I'll ensure you're heard, he said. Thank you, Harry said, and went to lunch. The Great Hall at midday was full noise and ordinary life, which Harry had come to love specifically and not abstractly, the sound of 500 people at various stages of their day, tired and energized and bored and delighted, the smell of food and winter coats, the specific comfortable chaos of a place where people ate together. He found Ron and Hermione and sat between them and loaded his plate and let the noise of the hall come in from every direction. How was Dumbledore? Ron asked. Honest, Harry said. For the most part. Only for the most part. He's working on it, Harry said. It's harder for some people. Hermione was looking at the high table. He looks different, she said quietly. Than yesterday. Harry followed her gaze. Dumbledore was at the high table in his usual seat, talking with McGonagall with the appearance of ordinary conversation, but something in his bearing was different, less performance, something underneath it slightly more visible. Not diminished. More real. Something shifted, Harry said. What? The plan he had for this year, Harry said. The shape of it changed last night. He needed time to find what the new shape was. And has he found it? Hermione asked. I think he's looking, Harry said. She looked at the high table for another moment, then back at her plate. Snape's looking at you, she said, in the same conversational tone. Harry glanced toward the high table. Snape was indeed looking at him, which was not unusual. Snape looked at Harry frequently, a habit formed in the first potions lesson and maintained with the consistency of someone who has found an interesting problem and keeps returning to it. Today the look had a different quality, something the Soul Stone parsed as, news has traveled, and I am recalibrating, and I am not going to give you the satisfaction of showing it. Harry raised his eyebrows slightly. Snape looked at his food. He knows, Ron said, with quiet delight. He knows something happened, Harry said. Madame Pomfrey would have told the staff there was a medical situation and the third-floor corridor was involved. The exact details will travel at whatever speed Dumbledore is comfortable with. Is Snape going to be weird about it? Ron said. Snape is always weird about things, Harry said. That's not a criticism. It's how he processes. Draco Malfoy appeared at the end of the table. This was unusual. Draco did not as a rule visit the Gryffindor table. The geography of Hogwarts mealtimes had social rules that were not quite as rigid as the interhouse relationships they expressed but were enforced by the same collective weight. He stood at the end of the bench with the expression of someone who had decided to do something and was committed to not looking like they deliberated about it. Potter, he said. Malfoy, Harry said. Can I? He looked at the bench space. For a minute. Harry moved sideways. Ron made a face that he directed at the ceiling. Hermione looked at Draco with the cautious curiosity of someone who hadn't reached a verdict yet but was open to evidence. Draco sat, which required visible effort, and looked at the table rather than at Harry. I heard something happened last night, Draco said. In the third-floor corridor. Things happen, Harry said. Quarrels in the hospital wing. Yes. Draco was quiet for a moment, his jaw working slightly on something he was arranging. My father, he said, and then stopped and started again. My father talks about Professor Quirrell. Positively. Since the beginning of term. He looked at Harry sideways. My father doesn't usually speak positively about people unless they're useful to him. Harry looked at him steadily and waited. I don't know what my father is involved in, Draco said, in the specific tone of someone saying something that is very true and very uncomfortable and has clearly been sitting on them for some time. I'm not part of it. I want you to know that. I know, Harry said. Draco looked at him. You know. Yes, Harry said simply. How? Harry held his gaze. You're not the same as your father, Draco, he said. That's not an insult or a reassurance. It's an observation. You make your own choices. He paused. And the ones you've made this year, since Madame Malkin's, have been better ones than the first few seconds suggested you were going to make. Draco looked at the table for a moment. The soul stone showed Harry the layers of it, the pride that wanted to reject the observation, the genuine thing underneath that wanted to receive it, the specific conflict of someone who has been told their whole life that where they come from is what they are and who is starting to find the limits of that. The thing in the corridor, Draco said. Is it handled? For now, Harry said. The immediate threat is gone. The larger picture is ongoing. And my father, I'm aware of your father's situation, Harry said carefully. I'm not going to tell you what to do about it. But I think you know the difference between loyalty to family and loyalty to what your family does. Those aren't the same thing. Draco was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Ron had finished 2 more servings of pudding and Hermione had annotated 3 pages. Then he said, very quietly, he has something. My father. Something he's proud of having. I don't know what it is, but I've heard him, in his study, talking about it like it's a project. Harry held his expression level. The soul stone showed him Draco's intention, genuine, the specific courage of someone offering information that costs them something. The diary, Harry said. Draco blinked. You know about it. I know about it, Harry said. And I know it's not yours and you didn't choose it. Thank you for telling me. Draco stood up. He had the expression of someone who has crossed a bridge and is not yet sure how they feel about being on the other side but knows they can't go back over. The things you said at Malkin's, he said. About finding out yourself who's worth being friends with. Yes. Draco looked at him for a moment, then at the Gryffindor table, then back. How do you know, he said. How do you tell? Harry thought about Nebula, who had shown up at his training sessions uninvited. About Ron, who had asked directly whether to be worried. About Hermione, who had opened her notebook the moment she decided something was worth documenting. About Thanos, who had removed his gauntlet and held out his bare hand. About Quirrell, who had said might have been something in the voice of someone keeping a small thing alive in a very hard place. They show you what they actually are when things get difficult, Harry said. People who are worth it, they don't get smaller when it costs them something to stay. Draco looked at him for 3 seconds with the full attention of someone hearing something they needed. Then he walked back to the Slytherin table without another word, straight-backed, returning to his own geography. Ron watched him go. Did that just happen? He said. Yes, Harry said. Malfoy just voluntarily came and sat at our table and told you useful information and left without being awful about it. Yes. And you're fine. That's fine. It's a start, Harry said. People usually start somewhere. Ron looked at the Slytherin table, where Draco had resumed his seat and was answering something Crabbe said with less warmth than usual and more distraction. A start, Ron said, slowly, trying the idea on. Then, fine. Okay. But if he's awful again, he probably will be sometimes, Harry said. People usually are before they figure out they don't have to be. Ron considered this. You're very patient with people, he said, as observation rather than compliment. I had a good teacher, Harry said. After lunch, in the corridor outside Charms, Neville stopped Harry with the specific quality of someone who has been building up to something for a while and has decided today is the day. He stood in front of Harry with his toad tucked against his robes and his chin up in the way he had when he was doing something brave in the particular Neville style, quiet, unglamorous, getting it done. "I wanted to say," Neville said, "that whatever happened last night, I know you did something. I don't know what. But I felt, this morning, when I came down, it felt different. The castle. Like something that had been tight had, he searched for it. Let out." The soul stone showed Harry the truth of this. Neville had the specific magical sensitivity of someone whose power was larger than his confidence suggested, the kind of residual awareness that strong wizards developed and often didn't recognize in themselves. "You felt that?" Harry said. "Is that strange?" Neville said, with the defensive expectation of someone who has been told they're wrong before. "No," Harry said. "That's actually, Neville, that's a genuine magical perception. Not everyone can feel ambient shifts in a building's enchantment structure." He looked at him. "You should mention it to Professor Flitwick. Frame it as a question about magical sensitivity in enclosed spaces. He'll be interested." Neville blinked. "You think so?" "I know so," Harry said. "Your instincts are good. They've been good all term. You need to start trusting them." Neville held Trevor to his chest and looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has been told something so specific and so accurate that the only response is to believe it. "Right," he said. "Okay. Right." "Good," Harry said, and they went to Charms. 2 days later, Dumbledore gathered the school. It was not a formal assembly, it was more organic than that, a Sunday afternoon when the castle had a particular quality of collective stillness and Dumbledore appeared in the great hall with the gravity of someone who had decided to speak to all of his students and not in the usual way. The 4 tables filled gradually, students drifting in with the instinctive recognition that something significant was about to be said, and the hall settled into quiet. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione. He had known this was coming, the time stone had given him the outline, not the specific words but the shape of the event, and he had decided not to prepare for it. Some things deserve to arrive without preparation. Dumbledore looked out at the assembled school for a moment, his hands at his sides rather than folded, his expression without the usual performance. "This week," he said, "something happened at Hogwarts that I want to address directly, rather than allow to become rumor." His voice carried without amplification, the way voices carry when they have genuine weight behind them. An attempt was made to access something in this school that would have given a significant magical threat a means of return to power. That attempt failed. He paused. It failed because of the courage, intelligence, and extraordinary capability of one of your number, who acted to protect this school and the people in it. The hall was very quiet. A few hundred heads turned, assessing. Harry kept his eyes on the headmaster. "I want to be precise about what I mean by extraordinary," Dumbledore continued. "I don't mean talented, or brave in the conventional sense, or simply more powerful. I mean that what was brought to bear on this situation was wisdom, actual wisdom, the kind that takes time and honesty and difficulty to develop, and that cannot be manufactured or shortcut." He looked at the hall with the clear eyes of someone who has decided to be honest with 400 people and is doing it. "This school will always be a place where you are taught. But the best teaching does not always come from the staff." His gaze found Harry for a moment, one moment, not lingering, not performing, and moved on. "The staff and I will be communicating some adjustments to certain practices," Dumbledore said. "You may notice changes in how information is shared within the school, in how students are consulted on matters that affect them, in how, a brief pause, how transparency is weighted against the impulse toward management." He let that sit for a moment. "I say this publicly because private acknowledgments are incomplete ones. Good institutions improve publicly or they don't improve at all." He looked at the hall. "That is all. Enjoy your Sunday." The murmur that rose as he stepped back was the specific murmur of 400 people all having the same conversation in different words. Harry looked at his hands in his lap and felt the warmth of all 6 stones steady and present and integrated, and felt the castle around him, and felt his two friends on either side of him in the particular way the soul stone felt people you had chosen, not as data, not as protection, but as themselves, real and specific and irreplaceable. He basically just told the whole school, Ron said, beside him. Yes, Harry said. Without saying your name. Everyone knows, Hermione said, in the tone of someone noting a fact. The sorting hat. The corridor. The Quidditch pitch. It's been fairly visible. The whole year's been fairly visible, Ron said. You have a way of being noticeable without, he frowned, looking for it. You're not trying to be noticed. But things notice you. Things notice what they recognize, Harry said. What does that mean? The stones have been in the universe since before most things in it existed, Harry said. When they go somewhere, things feel it. Like, he thought of the arbiter of the deep, prostrating itself on the water. Old things have long memories. Ron looked at the ceiling. Right, he said. Normal school, this. Hermione laughed, which was a specific sound, rare enough to be notable, genuine enough to change the quality of whatever room it happened in. Ron looked at her with surprise and then laughed too, and Harry sat between his two friends in the Great Hall of Hogwarts and laughed as well, and the sound of it was ordinary and real and exactly the right thing to be doing on a Sunday afternoon. That evening, Harry went to the Owlery. He sat on the broad stone ledge where the owls roost and let Hedwig land on his arm and settle with the specific quality of an animal that has decided you're worth settling on. She was warm and white and looked at him with orange eyes that were, the soul stone had always confirmed, simply affectionate, no complexity, no agenda, just the clean simple connection of a creature that has chosen its person and is content with the choice. He wrote the letter with her watching. Thanos, he wrote. It's been a year. The immediate situation is handled. The stone is gone, unmade, not hidden. Voldemort is reduced and displaced. The Horcruxes are the remaining work and I have a plan for them that I'll send separately when the time is right. Quirrell is in the hospital wing, recovering, and I think he might actually be okay eventually. The school is good. My friends are good. The headmaster and I have reached an agreement that involves honesty from both sides, which I think will hold. It's a strange world, small by the standards we're used to, but not small in the ways that matter. The people here are trying. Most of them are actually trying. I wanted you to know that it's fine here. That I'm fine here. That the thing you did, taking a child out of a cupboard and giving him everything, I don't have words for it that are the right size. I've tried in several languages. None of them have the right scale. Come at the end of term if you want. I want to show you the Quidditch pitch. I think you'll find it ridiculous and I want to watch you find it ridiculous. Harry P.S. Nebula says my left side drops. It doesn't. He tied the letter to the school's fastest owl, the one the staff used for urgent correspondence, which Harry had established a working relationship with in October and which would make the intergalactic transit with a minimum of fuss because Thanos had set up a relay system for Harry's correspondence that bent the spatial constraints of Owl Post in a way that Hermione had found theoretically delightful and practically baffling. The owl left. Hedwig watched it go with the proprietary attention of a bird who had opinions about other owls in her territory. Harry looked at the dark sky above the castle. December had brought its stars, the winter ones that were different from the summer ones in the way that all things were different when seen from a different angle of the same position. He'd seen these stars from outside the atmosphere, had been in them, had named some of them things that their astronomical catalog entries didn't include because the astronomical catalog didn't have opinions and he did. They were still beautiful from here. They were possibly more beautiful from here than from out there, the distance and the atmosphere doing something to the light that made it warmer, more specific, the way things look through glass you've been on both sides of. He thought about the morning after his first night in the floating mountain garden, waking up under the flower petals with his hands open, and the feeling he'd had then, of being given something he'd never been given before, space and warmth and honest conversation, the basic things that had been withheld as though they were rare and were in fact the most ordinary things in the universe, available everywhere. Withheld only by the specific deliberate cruelty of people who had decided he didn't. Deserve them. He thought about 37 inches. He thought about the stones choosing him in the dark, the way they'd moved with the certainty of something that had been looking for exactly this. He looked at his hands, not small anymore, a year of growth and training and use, the hands of someone who had moved moons and stopped wars and unmade an ancient artifact and helped a man remember he was still a person. Hedwig stepped up his arm to his shoulder and tucked her head against the side of his neck, warm feathers, warm weight, the specific uncomplicated love of an animal that had decided. Okay, Harry said, to the sky, to the castle below, to whatever was listening in the way that things sometimes listened when you were a particular kind of signal. I'm here. I know what I am. I know where I am. He felt the stones answer him, all six, the steady warm chord of them, the specific signature of something that had been in the universe since before the universe had its current name and had decided, in a cupboard under some stairs in Surrey, that this was where they belonged. Let's see what comes next, Harry said. The end of term was a week away. The castle was filling with the specific energy of people preparing to go home, packing trunks, finishing essays that had been put off, the bittersweet quality of a place that you were leaving and coming back to, which was a specific feeling that Harry had been developing all term. The going home feeling. Not the Dursleys, that was never home, that was where home had been withheld. But the coming back to. The knowing there was a here to return to. He climbed down from the Ollery and went back through the castle, through corridors that were familiar now in the way that places become familiar, not because you've memorized them but because you've moved through them enough that the memory lives in your body rather than your head. Past the portrait of the fat friar that always nodded at him. Past the suit of armor that had been slightly misaligned since October and that Harry had straightened twice and that someone kept tilting back. Past the third-floor corridor, which was just a corridor again, its door ordinary, its function back to being whatever it had been before Dumbledore's long game had temporarily made it something else. Through the portrait hole and into the common room, which was full on a Sunday evening, people in armchairs with books and games and the low warm noise of a room full of people who are comfortable with each other. The fire was high. The red and gold colors of the room absorbed the light and threw it back in a specific way that Harry had come to associate with arriving rather than entering. Ron was at the chess table, playing against himself, which meant he was playing against the program Harry had set up, and winning about half the time. He looked up when Harry came in. "There you are," he said, in the tone of someone who had not been worried and also had. "Here I am," Harry said. "Owl sent." "Owl sent." "Good." Ron moved a piece. "Hermione's in the chair by the window. She's been in the same chapter for 40 minutes, which means she's either found something upsetting or something brilliant." Harry looked at the chair by the window. Hermione was there, her book open but not being read, her gaze slightly out the window at the dark grounds. She felt him looking and looked back, and the soul stone showed him what it always showed him with her, the specific warm precision of someone who was thinking about something and was happy to be interrupted by this particular person. He went and sat in the chair opposite her. "What did you find?" he said. She looked at the book. "The Theoretical Framework for Soul Stone-Assisted Memory Reconstruction," she said. "In Volume 6 of the Corvith Compendium. It's referencing a technique that, Harry, I think with the right research framework, we could reconstruct some of the." She stopped. "Your parents," she said carefully. "There might be a way to access what they were. As people. Not a photo, not other people's memories filtered through grief, actual documentation of who they were." Harry looked at her for a long moment. "It's early," she said. "It would take research and probably a year at least to develop the framework, and I haven't worked out all the implications yet, and I might be completely wrong about the Hermione," Harry said. She stopped. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him with those very precise eyes, and the soul stone gave him the full picture of her, the girl who had arrived in his train compartment with a notebook and a toad search and an immediate, serious decision that this was worth paying attention to, who had spent 4 months annotating 7 volumes of alien scholarship in 3 colors of ink, who had corrected a vampire lecture in the second week of term and apologized to no one for it, who had stood outside a chess chamber and Watched him take a hit and held herself to the agreed approach because she trusted him, and then spent the next 30 seconds of her life not breathing. She was possibly the most remarkable human he'd met. He'd met a significant number at this point. "I'll do the groundwork over the holidays," she said, returning to the book in the specific way of someone who has given someone something real and is now giving them space to hold it. "And present what I have to you at the start of next term." "Good," Harry said, and meant it completely. Ron's chess program made a move. Ron made a sound of protest. The fire crackled. Outside, the December dark was thick and star-filled, the grounds white with snow that had finally committed, and somewhere in the castle Peeves was doing something that the distant sound quality suggested was both loud and damp and would be someone else's problem to sort out. An ordinary evening. Harry sat in his armchair and felt the castle around him, the weight and age of it, the 500 people who lived in it and most of whom didn't know what he was and some of whom were starting to, and all of whom were here, doing the daily work of learning things, which was the most fundamental and stubborn and quietly extraordinary thing a person could do. He felt the stones in him, steady, integrated, home in the way that a heartbeat is home, not noticed in the absence of drama, simply there, simply continuous, the deep running chord of everything. He thought about what came next. The diary. The chamber. The years ahead, each one with its own shape that the time stone showed him as probability distributions rather than certainties, which was its gift and its honesty both. Voldemort's return, eventually, because things like Voldemort had a kind of gravitational persistence that made return probable even when all the easy paths were closed. The Horcruxes. The people who would need to be what they were and the systems that would need to change. None of it frightened him. Some of it moved him, specific people in specific moments, the thing the soul stone showed you when you paid attention to what mattered. He was 11 years old and had been to the edge of the known universe and come back. He had argued a cosmic warlord out of his worst philosophy and been raised by the result. He had 6 forces of reality integrated into his bones and the specific love of 2 friends who had decided before they fully understood what they were deciding that this was worth it. He had carried 2 books and a broken soldier to the edge of the known universe. He looked at the fire. Tomorrow he'd go to Transfiguration and do his homework and eat breakfast in the Great Hall and probably beat Ron at chess and definitely get drawn into another debate with Hermione about the precise semantics of the Watcher academic dialect's instrumental case. The year after that, something would happen with a diary and a chamber and a basilisk, and Harry would handle it. The year after that, something else. And so on. He was in no hurry. He was 11 years old and had, as far as the time stone could reasonably project, a very long time. The fire burned. Ron lost to his chess program and objected loudly. Hermione turned a page. Somewhere outside, an owl called once and was answered by another, and the sound of it came through the window glass in the specific muffled way of winter, present and distant and entirely real. Harry smiled at the fire. The god of all reality was right where he wanted to be.